I'll just give a few minutes for people to filter in before we start, since we have another minute or so. So we're going to have our panel of speakers. They've been given 15 minutes, and then originally we had 5 minutes for questions. We may not have that, but we do have time at the end that we've built in that we can have questions. So if we don't have time, we'll move on, and then you can save your questions for the end. Okay. So, all right. Okay, everybody, welcome very much to the Coastal and Marine Research session. I'm Dr. Denise Shale, and I'm going to welcome you to our session on inclusive and sustainable coastal and marine resources. And in order to showcase the different work that's being done in CMR, we've entitled it sort of from fisheries, or fisheries from nursery to governance, because CMR is actually quite a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary unit or institute within the university. All faculties are represented, and a lot of people are doing work in ocean sciences that aren't necessarily in the biological sciences or the physical sciences. There's also social sciences, law, health, etc. So we also have a mix of early career and mid and late career, or established researchers, sorry, that are going to give their talks. So we have a nice overview of some of the work, but within the theme of the sustainable and inclusive use of marine resources. So this morning is going to be ecology, conservation, and small-scale fishers. And in the afternoon session, when we come back, we're going to look at marine spatial planning, governance, the different laws, and how we enforce those laws. So it's going to take us through that. And so I'm going to welcome up our first speaker, who's Dr. Gavin Rishworth, who's been doing some really fantastic work on slime. He will explain to us what that means. He's from the Department of Zoology and CMR. We are going to try and keep to time, so it's 15-minute talks. If we have time, we'll have a question. Otherwise, we'll save questions to the end because we've built in some time for that. So over to you, Gavin.
Project to the online participants. So yeah, my research primarily is on these things called microbialite pools, and I'm going to be trying to make a case for why they're relevant and why they're interesting. So every talk that I ever give on these starts with what is a microbialite. So a microbialite is a living rock formed by microbial organisms. So it's essentially something that photosynthesizes a biofilm, cyanobacteria and diatoms, that as it metabolizes, it leaves behind a calcium carbonate deposit. A stromatolite is a specifically layered calcium carbonate deposit, and a microbialite can be layered or unlayered. So that stromatolite there is a living rock. I've brought the sample here if anybody would like to see what a stromatolite looks like. This is from Seaview, so just around the corner here in South Africa. Why do we care about stromatolites? They were life's or Earth's first ecosystems. So from about 3.5 billion years ago, most of the shallow seas and coastlines would have looked something like that, with these biofilm deposits accreting in the shallow coastal environments. And throughout most of Earth's evolutionary history, the coast would have looked something like this, until about 500 million years ago, when animals evolved and life started to resemble more like what we know today. But as you'll see on the graph, in the present, so that's the relative abundance of microbialites on the left, with some fluctuations and boom and bust cycles, but by the present, microbialites are virtually extinct in most of the modern ecosystems. And this is because things like animals and plants or macroalgae evolved, and they became better competitors. They ate and they disrupted something that was so well layered like this, got bioturbated and homogenized by animals. I'm here because we've got stromatolites in South Africa. These were only discovered and described along our coastline as recently as 2012. So we've only been studying them for just over a decade now. So this is a slime or supertidal spring-fed living microbialite ecosystem, and I'll get into why we are so particular about that acronym in a minute, but slime is sort of what we refer to our specific South African microbialites, and there you'll see me in the middle just for scale on how big these things are. So anybody that's ever been to Schoenmaker's Kop just around the corner would recognize something like that as a slimy pool, which we now recognize for its importance as a microbialite. Why do these systems actually form? If you would like to know more, this figure is explained in a paper that we wrote in 2020. There's a groundwater seepage that enters into this pool. That's fresh water. It's rich in calcium carbonate. And as I mentioned, a stromatolite is a calcium carbonate deposit. Most of the world's ocean is now depleted in calcium carbonates because the shell-forming organisms, the coral reef, have taken out the calcium carbonate. So that's one reason why we don't get microbialites in modern coasts. But there's also this periodic overtopping of marine water. So they occur at the supertidal, so just above the tidal influence, but big storms, spring tides do introduce some marine water. And this creates this dynamic shift between fresh and salty water, which excludes most of the bioturbating organisms that would otherwise disrupt the stromatolites. It's a relatively small ecosystem, maximum about 100 square meters each. But as you might see from the South African coastline, they're dotted all the way from the west coast to the east coast. And here, off of the Nelson Mandela Bay coast, on a 50-kilometer stretch, there's 1,500 of these seepage points in these sites, ranging in size from about a 1 square meter area to about 100 square meters in total area. So, you would see my talk is, though they be small, are they mighty? I'm going to try and make a case for why the small stromatolites are mighty. We get them in southwestern Australia, in Northern Ireland so far, but other stromatolites, inland ones, do occur in a few places around the world. So what does this all mean? So I'm going to be talking about ecological traps, evolutionary islands, and stepping stones to try and give you a sense of the biology of these systems. So an ecological trap is something that sends a signal to an organism that is false for that organism. So, for example, we noticed that things like Rhabdosargus, which is an important lionfish species along our coast, and Pseudomyxus compensis, which is an important forage fish in many of our estuaries, are actually queuing towards these stromatolite pools, thinking that they're a big estuary. Which estuary has been an important nursery area for many fish species. The next question is whether there's any functional value of these systems, because they're very small. So Sam, in that picture, he, for example, looked at the body condition of these Pseudomyxus and found that their body condition is lower in the stromatolites than they are in surrounding estuaries and rocky coasts. Philip, who published his work this year, he was one of our honor students, he looked at white musclecracker, Sparidon durbanensis, which is also an important lionfish species. And this story was quite interesting because it can tolerate the extreme salinity variations in the microbialite pools, which are typically like estuaries, so it goes from fresh to salty and everything in between. but you never find them in true estuaries. So it's adaptable to the conditions of an estuary, but it doesn't use an estuary as a nursery area. And he made the case for the microbial pools and this extreme environment actually being almost a refugia that this species particularly opportunizes on. So the ecological traps we're still trying to work on in terms of whether they recruit to other adult populations, but it seems to be important for some fish species. We also know that they are promoting biodiversity. So for example, this little critter is about the size of a rice grain. We discovered it in our stromatolites, and it's the only place in the world we've ever found it. So we named it Sinolobus stromatoliticus. You can see my finger there with an indication of just how big the critter is. So clearly some biodiversity relevance of these sites. We also have the goby on the right-hand side, Coriogallops sordidus. The type specimen for that is actually in Mozambique. Between Mozambique and our coastline, we don't find it, but we find it in the stromatolites. And one reason that we think that that might be the case is the stromatolites, because of the buffered groundwater, tend to be warmer than much of the other coastline, and as a refugia for that particular species. It's also got a very high trematode load on it. So trematode is the parasite. You'll see the arrows are pointed to little black spots, but that doesn't appear to influence its energetics at all. The fish are doing fine, and it's the only resident fish species in the microbial pools. So it seems to have found a little refugia for itself and maximizing on the resources in there. The last point is the stepping stones of connectivity. So these systems are similar to estuaries. So one hypothesis is that they are acting as stepping stones between our major estuaries along the coast. So, for example, the Gamtoos estuary just around the corner from us closed for the first time a few years ago in recent memory. And estuaries are important for many fish and invertebrate species as nurseries. And if through drought and other water abstraction pressures are closing more regularly, habitats that provide stepping stones between the coastline become more important. So this was work that we did comparing the stromatolites and estuaries for an important polychaete species that is a forage fish or a forage item for many birds and fish. And we showed that it is opportunizing on the stromatolites because it is hypertolerant of many of the variable conditions in the system. Sarah Hawkes, who is in the room here, asked the same question, and now in her PhD is asking this in terms of tolerance and diet for Melita zeylanica, which is a ubiquitous amphipod species that we find all along our coast, and it is opportunizing on the stromatolites. And what you can see in this graph, ignore necessarily the colors, but look at the one on the far left. It's much smaller than everything else, and that is the nutritional value of the stromatolites. This species seems to be eating everything except the stromatolites in the pools, and hence is not bioturbating and destroying the stromatolites. So the critters in here are very tolerant of the condition, but they also don't seem to be destroying their home, so to speak, which is one potential reason why the stromatolites are persisting. We're asking the same question in terms of connectivity using genetics techniques. So we've got a project running with University of Johannesburg and the DFG in Germany looking at this network. So all the black dots there are the stromatolites that occur along our coastline at St. Francis and Nelson Mandela Bay with gaps in between, but there are estuaries and rocky shores in between. So they're comparing the communities using meta-barcoding between the systems to see, is this one connected continuum of organisms, or are the stromatolites something unique? They're more important than just for the biological organisms, and they are potentially important for us and our early modern human history. So we published this work in 2020 looking at the Paleo-Agulhas Plain, which is an extended platform off of the coast of George and Mossel Bay, depicted in the image there, which was important for early modern human cognition. Hypothesized for that reason because of the abundant food resources and relatively stable landscape. But as you know, humans need water too, as well as food. Estuaries are not a very good source of water because you have to walk really far between estuaries if you're utilizing the coast. But I've already indicated these systems have this continuous supply of fresh water, and along, for example, a 50-kilometer stretch, 1,500, that gives you an indication of a very regular spacing of drinkable fresh water. So we showed using side-scan sonar offshore of the Paleoagulhas Plain, looking for the characteristic shapes of the stromatolites, that the Paleoagulhas Plain would have been rich not only in food resources, but also many accessible freshwater points like the stromatolites for that. We then visited the Paleoagulhas Plain modern coastline and saw that humans are using the freshwater for their modern homes and extracting the groundwater. So obviously, if this groundwater runs out, it would destroy the microbialite ecosystem, but there's clearly a modern as well as an older value of these systems. So we had a PhD student who's now a postdoc with us, Dr. Carla Dodd. Her PhD was all about, are the stromatolites along our coastline linked to our catchment? How old is the water? Is it polluted? And where does it come from in terms of the rainfall cycle? So in the Algoa water supply system, which we know is a very drought-stricken area, she wanted to know, for example, how old is the groundwater that's entering these pools? And without going into too much detail, in the top right, you can see tritium dating, which essentially gives us an indication of how old the groundwater is. The bigger the dot, the younger the water is. And you can possibly see from the graph that the dots close to the coast, which are the microbialites, are the smallest dots, which indicates that this water can be anywhere from 10 to 100 years old, which is a very old source relative to what our modern drought conditions are, which might mean that the water that we're abstracting at the coast proximal to these systems has a very slow recharge time and potentially threatens these valuable ecosystems. So in conclusion, hopefully I've convinced you, slime are important for coastal organisms as these traps and valuable biodiversity spots, as evolutionary islands. They provide connectivity for many species, which we're still trying to unpack, potentially relevant for paleo communities and also for modern society, which we are now working towards using these as a kind of canary in the coal mine for telling us what the inland aquifer resources might be telling us about, because they're so accessible on the coast. And of course, I would never have been able to do this without a very strong team and many collaborators and partners. And if you would like to know more about our stromatolites, Carla runs our social media pages as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gavin. You've held to time. We actually have a minute for one quick question. Okay, Mike.
Great talk. Right in the beginning, you showed a map of the world, but you didn't finish explaining how unique these sites are. Are they only found around Southern Africa? I saw there was other dots.
Yeah, so the only places that we know of them, South Africa is definitely the hotspot for them, but southwestern Australia and the Margaret River region, and also in Northern Ireland and the British Isles, there are sites. So those are the three global locations, and we're currently on a project that we're comparing the biology and geology across those three locations.
All right. Thank you so much, Gavin. Anyone else have questions, can please save them for tomorrow. I'm going to just try and introduce now Professor Nikki James. She's with SciAb, but we are very fortunate to have her here and located on Ocean Science Campus. And she and her students work from here, and she's going to talk to us further about nursery habitats and their importance for fisheries. So I'll take it.
Thanks, Denise. So as Denise said, I'm based at the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, and I'm also a CMR research associate. So our research group, does nothing. That's not good.
Doesn't exist.
regulating fish populations, with species which have specific habitat requirements in their early life stages. For these species, adult fish abundance can be linked to the availability of high-quality nursery habitats. So identifying essential habitats which are used by the early life stages of fish is increasingly becoming important in the ecosystem-based management of fishery species. So juvenile habitats are referred to as nurseries if they contribute a higher number of adult recruits to the adult population than other juvenile habitats. So nursery habitats are basically a subset of those juvenile habitats. So fish can have, if they use juvenile habitats, have two different strategies. So either the juvenile habitats are completely separated from the adult habitats. For example, fish that use estuaries as nursery areas, they then migrate to deeper reef as adults. Or the juveniles can be found in shallow water, and then the adults are found in slightly deeper water. So the South African shore-based fishery catches a lot of these fish that use shallow water nursery habitats. This is actually the largest fishery in terms of the number of participants in the country, and it's the hardest to manage. Unfortunately, many of these species, so this shows the top 10 species that are caught in terms of degree of targeting, the number of people involved, as well as the catch. And you can see that a lot of these species, their populations have actually completely collapsed or they are overfished. The species that use shallow water nursery habitats have got 3 different life history strategies. So some of them are marine estuarine dependent. So Gav introduced Cape Stumpnose. So what these species do is that they spawn in the marine environment. Their late-stage settlement larvae and juveniles then make their way into estuaries, and they remain in estuarine environments for between 1 to 2 years, and then they migrate out of the estuary, and their adults very rarely return to the estuarine environment, because I always like to think of these guys as having a superpower. So they're able to tolerate those fluctuating environmental conditions, particularly salinity, in their juvenile stages, and then as they turn into adults, they're no longer able to cope with fluctuating conditions. Then we get more species that are termed marine estuarine opportunists. So these guys can either use estuarine or coastal nursery habitats, and there are more of these species in our fishery. And then marine and marine stragglers. So I didn't put a number to these because I didn't want to have to go through a whole list of fish species. So these only use nearshore coastal habitats as estuaries and not estuarine nursery areas, but their adults can go into estuaries and use them as feeding grounds, but typically only the lower reaches of estuaries. So juvenile fish within these coastal seascapes actively select or use nursery habitat, and they do this based on food availability as well as access to shelter. So shelter reduces the predation risk for the small guys. But unfortunately, specific habitat features which promote high-quality nursery habitats for many of our exploited species are unknown, but this information is very important to not only understand global change threats to the nursery function of habitats, but also to use the management, conservation, and restoring high-quality nursery areas as a means to replenish adult fish populations. So in terms of nursery habitats, I told you about the importance of food and shelter. Our structured vegetated habitats are particularly important. So this is seagrass and canopy-forming macroalgae as an example. So the nursery function of seagrass for many species is well documented, with seagrass meadows thought to provide nursery habitat to over 1/5 of the world's fisheries species. Although less work has been done on canopy-forming macroalgae as nursery areas, as you can see in this map from a review we did on nursery function, many fish species in the tropics that are important in subsistence fisheries are thought to be to use small canopy-forming brown algae as juveniles. And in this review, we found that the nursery function of canopy-forming macroalgae may be similar to that of seagrass. But not all seagrass and macroalgal habitats are created equal in terms of nursery function. So, for example, plant cover or the density of that macrophyte, canopy height, which is often dependent on what species of macrophyte is present, and heterogeneity, which is the variety of species and functional forms present, all affect nursery quality in terms of the food that's available and the shelter from predation. So to address the research gap in terms of the importance of canopy-forming algae in South Africa, we had groups of students who were looking at the importance of seagrass, which was Zostera capensis in the Swartkops estuary, and then we have canopy-forming red algae in Algoa Bay called Placamium coralliza. So we looked at seaweed beds at Flat Rocks, which is just off Cape Recife. This shows we had cameras in the water, and we found that both habitats had a similar abundance of fish, but if you look specifically at juveniles, the macroalgae had a slightly higher abundance of juvenile fish than the seagrass. They were both dominated by the same family of fish, so these are sparrows or sea breams, which are very important in our recreational fishery. So the macroalgae had shoals of 2 species, so blacktail and streapie, and then the seagrass was dominated by Rhabdosargus haluvi, or the Cape stumpnose. So we wanted to know what habitat features were important for these species in terms of nursery provision. The first one was the Cape stumpnose, so that's a marine estuarine-dependent species. It's actually the dominant species, the dominant marine species found in our temperate South African estuaries. We looked at the habitats that it was using in the Bushman's estuary and also the diet of the fish, and we found that although they were found in all the different habitat types in the estuary, they were feeding primarily on seagrass and red algae, which was washing into the estuary. And they were also found in much higher abundance in the seagrass relative to the other habitats, particularly the other macrophyte, which was a salt marsh species called cordgrass. And when we looked at the stem density of the 2 macrophytes, the association with the stump-nosed juveniles was with high stem density. So there was a linear relationship between stem density and the abundance of juveniles. So we wanted to know whether they were just selecting seagrass or selecting seagrass with higher stem density. And we looked in the lab. We created artificial seagrass, and we introduced a little Cape stump-nosed juvenile into a tank where they had a choice between sparse seagrass, sand, and dense seagrass. So I want you to have a look at the little fish. I don't know if you can see it in the yellow circle. Okay, so if you keep your eye on it, when it's introduced into the tank, it mills around for a bit, trying to get its bearings, eventually goes and explores the sparse seagrass, goes straight over the sand, and then makes its way to the dense seagrass. And these experiments will run for an hour at a time, and they just sat in the dense seagrass. And we did this in the presence and absence of a predator. So in this one that you can see, there's a predator in the netted off section of the tank. So then when we compared what we got in the lab with the field, so this is the lab results. So there was a strong attraction for dense seagrass, and that was the same as we got in the field. Then we looked at those 2 other species, so blacktail and streapie, and we wanted to know if macroalgal heterogeneity, so the variety of macroalgal species you get in these macroalgal reefs are important, and also which species of macroalgae is important for our fish. So we went back to Flat Rocks, which is comprised of a mosaic of 2 main benthic habitat types. So we get canopy-forming algae on rocky outcrops, which we called high-profile reef. And then on the low-profile reef, we got low-growing algal morphotypes. So what we found was that both blacktail and streapie were present in high abundance throughout the cove, so in all the different mosaics of habitats, and they were all young of the year juveniles. We then looked at what macroalgae were present and what the fish were feeding on. So basically the rocky outcrops of the high-profile reef had the canopy-forming algae as well as understory taxa, and then the low-profile reef had low-growing turf algae and a species called Laurentia. And our fish, so the blacktail is an omnivore. It was feeding it had more plant material in its diet than animals, and it was feeding on those low-growing algae, so epiphytic algae, turf algae, and Laurentia. And then the same for streapie, which is a herbivore. It fed predominantly on those low-growing macroalgae. So we concluded that these species are probably using the canopy-forming Placamium for shelter because they weren't really feeding on it, and then the low-growing algae for food, which emphasizes the importance of both macroalgal heterogeneity in terms of food provision and shelter. We put cameras a little bit further down the coast, and this backed up our findings because we found in this section of reef where there's only boulders and turf algae, you can see the blacktail and strepy feeding, but they're all bigger individuals that don't really need the cover of the placamium for shelter. And then not all species like macrophytes, so they are benthic and demersal species that prefer unstructured sand and mud. So we also looked at nursery habitats for these guys. This is Pakama Nordor's PhD work, so she's now a postdoc in our research group. And she also studied in Algoa Bay, and she looked at the nursery function of demersal habitats in estuaries and the adjacent nearshore in Algoa Bay. And she found that the estuaries were far more productive nursery areas than the nearshore for benthic species. So there was actually a 3-fold greater abundance of young-of-the-year juvenile demersal species in the 2 estuaries than there were in the adjacent marine environment. And this is because estuaries have got freshwater input, lots of nutrients, and they're highly productive environments for fish to grow in. And then just looking on a species-by-species basis, so this is the dusky cob. It's also a marine estuarine-dependent species, and it's one of the ones that was in red in that earlier slide, so its population is said to be collapsed. It only uses estuaries as nursery areas, but they were all sitting in the Sundays estuary, and the Sundays estuary has greater freshwater input than the Swartkorps. It's got more nutrients available for fish. Other studies have also found that this species particularly prefers our really turbid estuaries with high freshwater flow. What was quite interesting is that this species, the silver cob, is one of the marine ones that doesn't use estuarine nursery areas, but it was also attracted to the freshwater inflow because it was found around the estuarine mouths. So it shows that even in the marine environment, the freshwater coming from estuaries is very important for fish species in their nursery habitats. Then this is a little lab study that we did, you probably can't see it very well, on dusky cob at the size that they recruit into estuaries. So we wanted to see how important turbid water is for them because we thought that they were actually attracted to turbidity plumes in the marine environment when they were recruiting into estuaries. So we introduced them in a choice chamber tank, gave them the choice between really clear water from the Kariga estuary and turbid water from the great fish, and they went straight to the turbid water. So just to show you what those turbidity plumes look like from these very turbid estuaries. So on the left is the Kariga, which has got almost no fresh water coming into it because of abstraction and droughts. So there's no turbidity plume for these guys to be attracted to. And sampling in the Kariga, unless there's been a major flood, you don't find those settlement stage dusky cob versus the great fish, which has got a huge turbidity plume. So in summary, where are we with this kind of information? So in South Africa, especially for the estuarine environment, it does feed into estuarine management plans and also freshwater ecological reserve studies for estuaries. In countries like the US, they've mandated that you have to work out essential fish habitats for exploited species. Unfortunately, we're not at that stage yet, but hopefully we will get there in the future. Thank you. Sorry, just to acknowledge my research group. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I don't think we might have time. Oh, sorry, Michael. Time for just one very quick question. Anybody have? Or we can save it to the end. Will we get ready for our next speaker? Thank you so much, Nick. Okay, so our next speaker will be Dr. Bernardino Maluane. He is associated with the Sarchi Chair in Oceanography and Food Sustainability, and he's going to be talking to us about his work on a different type of fishery. So one thing I didn't say at the beginning is that fishery isn't just finfish. So it's mussels, it's clams, it's seaweed, it's shrimp or prawns. And I think Bernardino is going to be talking to us about climate change and the effect that it has on fishery. So I'll let him.
Thank you, Denise. Good afternoon. It's just afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bernardino Malawene. I am a research fellow here at NMU and also associated with the Mozambique Oceanographic Institute, which used to be the Fisheries Research Institute in Mozambique. I'll be talking about this computer model that we did to understand the larval dispersal and recruitment in the Mozambique. And if you show the figure, this is the Sofala bank, and the colors in the block, it's the spawning area of these shrimps that we identify on the other work using observations. No? But here I'll focus on the model. Most of this work is published. Another one is going on the publication, part of a special issue with the 12 other papers that Prof. Mike is driving. Okay, so let's. Yes, I want to start with showing the life cycle of these shrimps. As you see from Nick, they have a quite similar. Nick shows quite similar life cycles. So these shrimps actually they have two phases, what we call the estuarine phase and the marine phase. No? So they have like a full life cycle within a year, where adults spawns offshore. Then they have a pelagic larvae that stays at the surface, and they have to actually migrate to the oceanic waters into the estuary. That's what they tell you. No? And then the juveniles settle at the bottom. In the Sofala Bank, there's about 6 of these species, which are native species. And since 2012, there have been 2 invasive species that start to occur. We don't really understand where they actually came from. And those 2 species, Penaeus indico and Metapenaeus monoceros, are the most important species, and they also dominate the catch. Mozambique have about 2/3 of the population living on the coast. So marine fisheries is very important for the population. And these prawns actually target by 3 main groups: the artisanal fishers, industrial, and semi-industrial. This is just to give you a quick overview of the impact. No? So actually the artisanal, it's a quite important sector, and you can see like about 600,000 women and men are actually involved in the artisanal sector. You know? But industrial and semi-industrial, it's also a very important sector, and also source of foreign income for the country. On the early 80s, actually it was the main source of foreign income. And you can see here the different pictures of how the fish is taking, the different for the different sectors. Okay, and for the catch, that will be the trends of the catch since 2006, and the red line actually the catch for the artisanal fishers, and you can see the catch, it's increasing. So there is more pressure of the artisanal fish. The problem is that they actually fish juveniles before they grow up, so they can go to offshore and spawn. You can see the blue and green light for the industrial and semi-industrial fishers, and you will see the industrial fishers is actually declining. Although with the petrol price, there is less boats fishing, but the catch is declining quite a lot. And it's actually quite a big conflict now between the 2 sectors, artisanal and industrial, because for many years, for instance, they have a close season for the artisanal fishers, which increased for 3 to 6 months over the years. Like for the industrial fishers, like for the artisanal, they fish all over the coastline. And some places it's very remote, so it's difficult to enforce a closed season. Although over the recent years, we also trying to put some, they also have 3 months of closed season to protect the juveniles. No? And yes, and what we know about the larval stage. Larva, it's very small, difficult to catch at the open ocean. You know? So actually there is very, very few knowledge about the wild prawn larvae. Most of the knowledge actually come from the agriculture because these similar species can be grown in agriculture. So we will use this biophysical model, you know? So we can put some biological parameters to try to understand how actually these larvae are doing on this life cycle. Okay, first thing we have to understand the circulation. The circulation is one of the main drivers for larval transports because on that group of larvae that I say that stays at the surface, we call the passive larvae. They can't swim, they just go with the current. So you have to understand the currents. And this is the surface circulation of the Western Indian Ocean. And you can see the Mozambique Channel is quite particular because there is no permanent continuous current. As you have for the Agalias current, for the Korushi current, and the other system, there is no permanent and continuous current in Mozambique. Rather, the circulation is dominated by eddies, you know. So the ocean is just going in small circles in 2 different directions, clockwise or unclockwise. I'll show you next. And we know that this circulation actually affects a lot of coastal material offshore. So the question now is what's happened with the shrimps larvae. Okay, this is a few examples of the simulation. So the larvae have a 15 days larval duration, the shrimps larvae. So after 15 days, so they can start swimming, and for that time you have to stop the model because we are just modeling the passive larvae that drift with the currents. So that will be after 5 days, 10 days, and 15 days, the last day of the simulation. And there I just show you a few examples on the last day of the simulation. The color will be for different release zones. No? And you can see as the day goes, larvae are actually transported offshore or to the south, as we can see, for place where larvae will not survive. Yeah? Although these eddies, the age of the eddies is very fast, so they can, if larvae are trapped there at the eddy, they can travel very quick. You know? And we see distance up to 1,600 kilometers within 15 days. You know? So it's potential they can reach KwaZulu-Natal, where similar population occurs, or this one, they just stop at the end of the simulation. We did 15 days very close to Madagascar, where another similar stock can occur. But they are not contributing for the local stock in the Sofala Bank. So the problem is still there for the locals. The other interesting thing, as I said, the eddies, they can rotate anti-clockwise, then it actually warms the ocean surface. And if they rotate clockwise, actually cooling the ocean. And this species actually are very sensitive to cold waters. You know? And they said when the winter it's very cold, we know that we will have a less catch for that season or for that particular year. You know? And what we showed here, we just try to understand how these larvae will actually suffer with these eddies. that generate the cool waters. This is just an example of satellite measure 2 days ago. There is not much cooling on the Sofala Bank on the central Mozambique, but these eddies can actually, there is no pointer. If you check on the blue line and the green line is actually the 20 degrees. So this eddy can actually decrease the temperature on the same range as the seasonal cycle. And if they reach below 23 degrees, then the larvae can actually start to die. And this also happens if you see on this site during the summer where you're expecting warm waters. It's like you have like a cold front. But I don't think like the larvae will have a forecast to know that there is a cold front comes. They just die. And if we go back to the life cycle, then this eddy can actually impact the amount of larvae that can actually reach the estuary. And we can estimate that at times it can go up to 20% of the larvae. Now we try to understand actually where are the estuaries, or where these larvae actually settle. And we can see here, this is releasing on the top one, this is releasing on the different spawning location, and this model is actually not an estuarine model. We consider settlement just when they arrive near the shore. It's where the larvae stay, then they develop to post larvae that can swim and get inside the estuaries. And you can see, if you go along the Sofala Bank, there is the northern, central, and the southern parts. But the southern parts, you can see it's very small. It's a very small settlement on that section. And if you sit on the beach and try to understand how the larvae actually arrive on the beach, we can see they will arrive with about 17 or 30 days when we release each day, and that will be equivalent of the spring to nip tidal cycle. So they arrive in tidal cycle. But they actually significant, the white one, the white line highlight the significance, and they actually significant in summer, but not in winter. Then you arise a question, but we have tides all the time in winter or in summer. So that will be the impact of the river, because it's a complex coastal zone. And if you check the origins of the larvae, they come from all this within this outlined by black line. And you can see here from the southern part of Beira, all the larvae that was released there didn't actually reach the coastal zone. And this is the place where we have the strongest tide. So they are just trapped on the tide going back and forward. So, and they don't reach the coastal zone. While from the other parts that we can see. So here on the simulation, we can actually remove the tide and check what's happened with them. And we see if we remove the tide, all the larvae from here then can reach the coastal zone. River, we have the Zambezi River on the central Sofala Bank. This is, if you go by plane and you look to the window, you can see that's what we call the river plume. And this actually, there is strong current with the runoff, and that prevents the larvae to settle in the river. And you can see also on the origins of the larvae. Okay, if we go back to the Mozambique circulation, where we have the eddies, these eddies actually generate very strong currents on the shelf. And this current, it's important because if you see here where do you have a strong anticyclonic eddy, the larvae that comes from the north actually can settle on the central parts. Then this makes the central part one of the most viable stock on the Sofala Bank. While the southern parts, it's quite insulated because it's protected in the bay. Yeah? So again, although this AD can take some larvae offshore, they are important for connectivity in between the three regions. And connectivity is important to maintenance of the stock. Yeah, this was just few wrap up. I will skip that. And thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Bernardino. Unfortunately, there won't be time for a quick question now, but we will now move into, oh, sorry. My computer is a touch screen. Sorry. I'm going to move to Professor Magda Mnguzi, who's going to take us to indigenous knowledge and fish traps. So these fisheries, we're trying to figure out how fish go and where they go and their importance. We are going to, there we go. Now segue into indigenous knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you to give me the opportunity to speak about my research and actually my passion. And for this, really, I feel privileged to be here and to have this opportunity, and I would like to thank you, Denise, for this invitation. Yes, I'm Magda Mnguzi from the School of Architecture here at the Nelson Mandela University, and I'm also part of the Institute for Coastal and Marine Research. And yeah, before I start, I would like to acknowledge the Khoi, and the sun as the traditional, spiritual, and cultural custodian of the land when we are meeting today. I would like to, and I pay my respect to the elders in the past, present, and emerging. And I acknowledge and recognize the importance of the cultural activities in course, and not only in South Africa, related to the land, the relationship and the project that they have with the land and the water in Southern Africa and beyond. Yes, so our research that is done in collaboration with the first indigenous people of Southern Africa, the Khoi and the San, is about the fish traps. So first of all, what are those fish traps? So the fish traps are actually the most ancient infrastructure that we can find along the coast. And they have been built by indigenous people, actually globally, because we can find those fish traps all over the world, and have been built to catch the fish using the different, or let's say the change of tides. We can hear, yeah, here there are some examples. Some are actually here in Nelson Mandela Bay in Cape Recife. And they are built in the intertidal region of the ocean in such a way that they facilitate the movement of the fish from in the traps, using those walls and those structure in a way that, yeah, that naturally the fish are moved in those areas, which are actually peaceful area in respect of the ocean that is very, you know, like quite turbulent. But those traps are, and that is the important part for me, are also living testimony of the deep knowledge and understanding that the indigenous people has on the different cycles of Mother Earth. For instance, they know very well the different cycle of the moons, which of course now affected the change of tides, and they know, of course, or they knew the currents on the ocean and the cycles and the migration of the fish to be able to catch them. And and also they knew the different change of level of the seabeds, all elements that actually were crucial to be able to position those traps in the strategic point where they are built. So to be able to catch the fish, you need to know all these and to know deeply all these elements. Otherwise, you are not catching fish, of course. So that becomes quite, difficult exercise, let's say. Yeah, you can see here different example, and I just decided or thought to add also these little video that show that some of those traps are still in use. And when the fish were actually caught and invited to, in some way, to achieve those traps, they were catch, or the communities, because we need to remember that that was a community activities, could and still catch the fish, while in the past with spears or with this fish nest. And I also wanted to mention that, as I said, those fish traps are located all across the globe. And what is interesting that is recently has been found also fish traps in Alaska that has been dated back 11,000 years ago. So it's really a technology that is, is very ancient and speak about the indigenous knowledge system related to the use of the coast. We've got interesting sites and fish traps sites all along the coast of South Africa. The one that we studied specifically, the one built with stone, and this is the area where we focused our studying and our research that has been done in co-authorship with the first indigenous people of Southern Africa. Now we'll see soon the group of work here. There are some of those traps that are here in Cape Recife. And but what is important to say also in respect of Southern Africa is that as we saw some example of, or one of the example where the fish traps still in use, but in Southern Africa we really need to be aware that because of the long history of repression and segregation that started with the arrival of the settled colonialists in Southern Africa, the indigenous people were forced to stop the practice and the lifestyle that was related to the ocean. So they could not use anymore those sites. And, actually the peak of this repression of the use of the coast and the resources was in August 1903 with the Fish Protect Act that was promulgated, which stated that none actually could use any more the coast for any type of reason related to catching fish of any source. So that, of course, gives us the idea of also the how the relationship among those communities, the indigenous communities, and the sites started to occur. Because if you don't go in a place, you don't, visit those places anymore, those places started to have less importance, and the connection, also the cultural connection, started to fade away. So our work, let's say I set up as a milestone the Spirit of Water, which was 2 days of ceremony that we organized in front of the fish traps with the chief that are based in Nelson Mandela Bay, the Khoisan and chief in Mandela Bay, the School of Architecture, staff and students, and also community member. We went there in front of the fish traps where they celebrated for 2 days. They could express their culture their culture and their rituals. And that was for us what we started, and actually the first act of what we call the practice of cultural reappropriation. So in some way my research is also a sort of activism to be able to reactivate this connection and also to give the opportunity for us to better understand, but also for the indigenous people to give a platform actually to rewrite the history done by them. So in essence, that is the work that we have been doing. And since 2017, we did different projects and research where for the first time we were able to document those fish traps in collaboration with the indigenous people. We could, and this is a group of work, we could, studying and move awareness on those sites. But those are the three major sites, but we keep finding other sites and we keep like also documenting. But for me, first of all, I would like to mention that for me, studying those sites, I'm an architect, so I've got like a slightly different view in respect of an archaeologist. I see those sites not as a single sites that need to be studied as in their own singularity, but I see those sites as a part of a sequence of events that are all along the coast. So those sites, which are the fish traps, are more related to the function of subsistence of a community, but they are all series of pre-colonial sites that are really make our coast very, very rich. Some are related to spiritual values, and so what we did is to visit and documenting and experience all those sites with the chief that were related to the specific area of where they were located, and the chief that were related to that area of belonging. And that is also what the late Professor De Witt would call African corridor, and we know that there is part of the Homo sapiens corridor and was the number 12, and Prof. De Witt actually highlighted 20 of those corridors in Africa. So one of the observations was also the distance amongst those, or in between those different fish traps. And I noticed that actually those are, they distance from each other as a one-day walking day, which means that a community, group of people could actually walk for one day and have always as a sort of point of reference some places where to go and catch the fish. Another aspect that was studied was the dimension of those traps. We've got smaller sites or bigger sites, and we see also that some of those traps in the bigger sites are, well preserved, let's say, other less. So we can imagine that those sites also extended according to the needs of the community. So if it was a small community, of course now you don't need like so many traps to feed your community, but let's put the case that maybe now a community grow up, so you need to extend those traps. And as we said, those traps were built as a community activity, and were also restored as a like some sort of maybe process or rituals even by the community itself, and keep it alive in that way. The shape of the traps are also very crucial, because as you can see, for instance, on the top there are some that look like a dam and are positioned in between of a very moved water, and some, and so they created this dam in order to slow down the water and to create a much peaceful place for the fish to go. And after that there was a series of round and more confined area where probably the fish were invited to go, and where area and pond that were much more easy to manage by people for the dimension. And it was also interesting for me to understand and see that those traps got like more or less the same dimension, not only in Southern Africa, but globally. And they are not bigger, the smallest one, than 10 meters of diameter. And that really speaks about the dimension / the dimension of the human body. Those we need to, imagine that we're built according to how big we are as a human being and how much we can manage easily those areas. And another thing that also those traps speak about is the economy of building those. Because, those are huge rocks, and it's not an easy exercise to build it and to restore it. So sometimes they use existing rocks as a starting point, and they build up around those existing rock to be able to manage easily. And all of that really speak about, as I said, to the knowledge and to the indigenous knowledge system that was alive. And in some way also those are living testimony of that knowledge that our ancestor has and still have. I just wanted to briefly show some of the also output of this research, and which the major one was the book, The Spirit of Water, which is open source. And here are the chief that collaborated, which has been acknowledged as a co-researcher of the project of research. And and I decided also to close with this image that speak about the acknowledgement that the chief received in last year, in 2023, by the Faculty of the Built Environment, the School of Architecture, as we acknowledge with the certificates the chief for the value of the engagement and the energy and the knowledge co-creation that they share with us, actually. And they gave us the opportunity to thank you.
Oh, excellent. And everyone is doing so well with time. I have to say thank you to our participants. So we have our last talk for this morning's session. And so we're going to move from our traditional fish traps to looking at learning with current fishers, ladies, with Mrs. Erna Senecal, who's the head of SIPSET and was part of the One Ocean Hub, which was a project with CMR and a broader global community. And so she will talk to us about her work with Dr. Bouchley Francis, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, and their work with the seaweed collectors along our coast. So, oops. I don't know why it keeps on there.
So what do I do to move it? Just the trackpad.
Yeah, there we go.
Just click on the trackpad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oops, excuse me. Sorry.
So I'm talking to most of you, and if I could ask you to just raise your hand if you are not from the natural or physical sciences in this room. Yeah. So maybe 5 people. And so my talk is asking you to look at what is happening in the ocean environment through the lens of people who live in a close relationship with the ocean. And Bouchley and I, but this is mainly I'm presenting Bouchley's research, and she offers you her apologies. She's in Lusikisiki today. And was unable to be here, so if I mangle this work, my apologies. So we have been working as part of a coastal justice network with small-scale fishers over a number of years, stretching from the Northern Cape right around to the KwaZulu-Natal coast, where people are also using fish traps and continue to do so, and where fishing communities over a period have been awarded rights in fishing by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, usually as a basket of species, and in the Eastern Cape in particular, such cooperatives were formed from 2018 to 2019 into 2020, and new cooperatives, which are all place-based, continue to be formed. In this particular talk, we want to focus on the harvesting of Gelidium pristoides, which is one of the major species harvested all along the southern coast. And I think those of you who are ocean and marine scientists will know more about this as a species, and I hope you will add. There's been quite a lot of research about the species itself and its harvesting and the effects of its harvesting, ecological harvesting, the ecological effects of its harvesting in the early 1990s. Sorry, okay. Three things. I'm not good at multitasking. But there's very little to date. There's monitoring of what is happening with the harvest, but what currently is happening in these environments is there's not much current research. So I want to take you on the journey of a seaweed harvester. And most of the women who harvest seaweed along our coast are in the former Ciskei and Transkei areas, where the collection of harvesting is seasonal, following the spring tides, and it is also facilitated by someone who acts what we would call a labor broker, as a labor broker. So there's one large national company that processes and exports seaweed, and they have agents at different parts of the coast who enter into a relationship with these women who harvest seaweed. They come from communities that have long established relationships to the ocean and have practices that are generationally passed on how to harvest in ways that help to support their livelihood, but also protect the ocean. Okay, so your day or your week, in fact, would start with someone in the community who's a group leader getting a message from the labor broker to say that the truck will come to pick you up. So you get your gear together, you get your food together, and you are at the picking up point to be collected on a specific day with other women from your community. And as a local group that have, in some instances, harvested seaweed for as much as 50 years, you would then be taken to the place that is allocated for harvesting, where this company has rights for seaweed harvesting. That is how it's happened until quite recently, and still continues to do. You stay along that stretch of coast for about 7 days. It's often remote parts of the coastline, so there's no bed and breakfast accommodation like researchers have when they do field trips. You sleep in the dunes. You don't have tents. You harvest based on what is happening with ocean tides, not on what is happening with the weather. So if the weather's awful, you are still out there in the rain and the wind and the cold. And then the seaweed that people are harvesting, this particular species, which you will know more of, grow in small tufts on oceans and on limpets. And they're harvested by either plucking them off, and they kind of like if anyone has ever tried to lift a limpet, the seaweed that is stuck on the limpet is equally stuck. It's quite hard to pluck off. So people don't remove the entire seaweed. They remove the top section of it. And they can do it by plucking, or they can do it by shearing, by cutting. So they have to have a knife or a kind of pair of scissors or something like that with which to harvest. And then the interesting thing to me was to find out, so what happens when, how do I do this? Oh, I did. What happens when people have now harvested? And how much do they harvest? How much does a single person harvest? And what happens afterwards? So in the previous slide, you may have noticed that there are women carrying bags on top of their heads, sometimes in front, not often over a shoulder, but mainly on their heads. And this is a bag filled with wet seaweed. They have to carry that bag to a collection point, and what we found is that often really well-meaning and middle-class ocean defenders will remove people's bags because they think that what is happening is theft from the ocean. And so some seaweed harvesters have had their entire day's production moved by well-meaning and people who think they know better. Yeah, okay, I'll just leave that observation there for you to consider. And so the truck comes back and picks up the harvests, leave you behind, and takes it to a central point. It's marked, it's weighed, and it's recorded. It's also recorded in documentation sent to DFFE, who then uses that to monitor what is happening. But it will take you and your harvest back to your village and drop you off close to your homestead, where it can take 5 to 10 days, depending on weather conditions, to dry out the seaweed. So you make this big spread like you see here in front of your home. And then the broker comes back with the truck, collects you and your seaweed, and transports you to East London, where this national company has an office, and your seaweed is weighed, and you are paid by kilogram for the dried seaweed. So in this picture, I tried to show you, this is the 100 grams of wet weight, will give you about 28.5 grams of dry weight. And in the end, this, for export use, this particular seaweed is used to produce agar, is that the right pronunciation? Which is obviously used in, as a chemical in both food production and in cosmetic production, but really, importantly, for everyone who grows something in a lab on another medium. So you would probably be familiar with a product that is picked and harvested along our coastline if you are growing things. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of income? Okay, why am I not doing this? Did I go too many? Yeah. So I wanted to sort of highlight with you the notion of decent work. South Africa is a signatory with the International Labour Organization to the concept of decent work. And we also in our constitution protect the right to work. But is this work that people do decent work? It's really difficult work. You are contracted as a person who comes with who is responsible for all your own labor costs. So you have your clothing that you wear, you have your protective gear that you wear, you have the food, all your equipment, all your production costs for this is carried by you. You contracted just for that trip So you're never an employee of anyone that is protected by South African labor law. You work as someone who comes in as an independent contractor. So you are essentially self-employed. And this is really, really important to consider. So is this decent work? Is a really important question to try and answer. Here's a payslip, recent one, 2023, of someone who is a seaweed harvester. She earned for that particular trip 588 rands and 80 cents. And that is her income for a fourth of the year, for 25% of the year from this work. So what I wondered about is, what does a company get? And what's the difference between the wet weight and the dry weight? So I did some sums, and I tried to ask a colleague to just check my sums. And the bit that I wanted to say to you, and I'll find the spot in my online presentation, it's not showing that. So if you can think back to that other slide, then essentially the value that goes back to people is about 6% of the export value of seaweed. So of all the work that these women do, what they return, what the return is for them is 6%. And here's someone who has for nearly 50 years been harvesting seaweed, and that was her payslip. Okay. So the next point is to, okay, sorry, that's not the next point. So here at the bottom, I've sort of inserted a picture of men getting on a bakkie and a big truck at the background. And this is what the transport looks like for seaweed harvesters. But here are men. Traditionally, this has been women's work. The intertidal zone in harvesting and living in a close relationship with that intertidal zone is women's space. This is where women harvest mussels. This is where women harvest whatever else of an ocean resource that their local community uses. Increasingly, as climate change and other human-induced changes fish stocks in local areas, men who have been fishing are moving to harvest seaweed and are encroaching on the space of women. So just imagine back to getting picked up in a truck of women that you know, that come from your village, now being picked up in a truck that contains men and women, being in remote locations, working for a period of 7 days. It shifts not only the fact that this was traditionally a source of livelihood for women, which is constrained in many communities by women's access to land and other supplementary livelihood resources. Now, mainly young men, who we have to recognize as part of the youth in our country, face enormous problems in finding work. They are also entering into this space. And we now come to the fact that when the department has tried to deal with this issue of the dominance of who has rights to seaweed, to give rights to collective groups, cooperative groups of people in a local area, and the right comes to a whole community of recognized small-scale fishers, men and women. So the right to harvest seaweed is now held by that cooperative, and women don't have control, have less control over it than they had initially. unless they can negotiate and unless there is an understanding in their cooperative over who will utilize that right and how it would happen. And so increasingly, this area of livelihood production becomes precarious for women. So what does this all have to do with the ocean? How am I doing for time? Okay. So I wanted to talk to you about what I think are the implications for research. And then the first point I want to make is to say that from what Buhle and I have learned from working with alongside small-scale fishers, is that we can't consider issues around sustainable use of coastal and marine resources and ocean governance without considering human rights, and especially the right to work with dignity, and that those are also covered in our own constitution. And so what does this mean if we do research work? If we accept that premise, that you cannot actually think about ocean governance without thinking about human rights too, then it means that research work in ocean defending and ocean protecting, and I'm using those kind of broader words than conservation, cannot happen without understanding and sense-making with coastal communities around the knowledges they bring and the social relations in which these knowledges are embedded, because they don't fly off by themselves. Your knowledge is embedded as researchers within specific social relations. And you may not think about it, but it is nevertheless there. The power that you hold as researchers is a social relation. So how do we kind of engage with the knowledges that other people hold and be aware that they are socially embedded knowledges? And are we weakening the knowledge that they have? Are we building or adding to it? We have to think about it as researchers. Then the other part is that it means that we have to rethink what is ethical, I think. We have to consider how we enter into research relationships. So this, and I really want to thank everyone who presented this morning, because at a very personal level, I just loved the science, natural science part of the presentations, because I could link it to my own snorkeling with my grandchild and other kind of ocean-loving activities that I engaged in. But I also think that when we're thinking about the knowledge output that such research produces, what does it do to shift socially unjust relations? How does this knowledge about slime, for example, help people who stand in a different relation to the ocean? And I got excited because I thought there were many. I'm going to be one more point and then I'm done. So I think we've got to extend our understanding of transdisciplinarity. So often we are thinking here that we work, I think we kind of misunderstand possibly transdisciplinarity and think interdisciplinary work is transdisciplinarity. But here it would mean that we have to bring into conversation in the physical and natural sciences other knowledges and questions. And then recognizing especially the critical importance of voices of coastal and small-scale fishing communities and bringing these different knowledges into conversation and contestation with one another. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We are lunch is starting in about 4 minutes. But I think those of you who would like to ask some questions of the people, if those of you who presented like to come up here, there are a couple chairs you can grab, and then we can open up for questions from the audience, because I think it's a really interesting looking, especially. Thank you so much, Erna, for the last talk. Putting into context the work we do in natural science and conservation, and marrying that with social and economic justice with the resources that we have. How do we marry our research and bring our research to people to make their lives better, and ensure that their relationship with our coastal and marine resources is also recognized and protected. So anybody have a question they want to start out? And then, of course, we have climate change on top of that. So I'll just segue to you, Mike, because I knew you'd start. So.
I enjoyed all the talks, but I enjoyed yours particularly because it's very distant to where I am, where I do computer models and stuff of climate change in the ocean. But, you know, it's sobering. The first thing is, was there indigenous use for seaweed before the economic side came along?
So as far as I know, traditional healers use certain types of seaweed. How they use it and what the purpose of that is, whether they're using this particular seaweed to create a suspension for other things, I don't know. But using it as a food source, the species that are currently harvested are not. The industry started in 1951, and I hope we all know what happened in 1948 in our country in terms of political and economic changes. So it's as part of that industrialization and the industrial relationship of people to the ocean.
So there's a wonderful parallel with the squid industry that's here.
Absolutely.
And I did an economic analysis and found out that the guys catching the squid are getting 6%. If not less. So I don't know how good. I'm sure someone else has got a question too.
I'll take this microphone. Tara has the microphone. I want to one announcement for housekeeping. As you leave, has a meal drink ticket for you. So please take that before you go and fetch your lunch and drinks. So just housekeeping there. Any other questions for any of our panel? Everyone's just hungry? Oh, go ahead. Oh, Tara will come for that. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question for you. So I'm just a normal person. I'm not into science or anything like that. Yeah, so my question is there any link in the stories of the khoisans with the fish traps? Or is it something that they also learned from you guys, the scientists?
The fish traps has been built by the descendant of the koi and the sun. So the first people that walk in this country were the descendant of the of the koi sun. So they are very much interconnected, and that is I don't want to say the heritage, because it's the heritage of everybody. Me, I'm Italian, and that is my heritage as well, because I recognize those as a heritage sites. But as I was trying to mention, is that because of the fact that there has been laws in place and restriction and enforcement, they were not able to use anymore those sites, and they were actually forced to don't move freely anymore, as many other actually also ethnic group in this country, freely in the territory. So they, you know, if you don't use a place, you sort of forget about that place. And So what we, in some of the sites also that we visit, what's happened also is that they heard about that place or some of those caves that we visit, but they didn't have any opportunity to visit for also, again, because the owner of the land that they need to cross to achieve the place, they don't give the permission, or, a story that's still very much repressive story. So, yeah, is related to the ancestors, and essentially what we are doing also together, because it's not that we are doing a work and they are part of the group of work. So whatever we are doing, really we do that together. We try to activate discussions. Every year, at least once, we go with the students, but also with a community member to visit those sites. We do some sort of, educational work. We do action research, and events to reactivate this link and to move awareness also on young generation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what I think is really interesting is that a lot of our understanding of what the southern part of Africa looked like many thousands of years ago is within a colonial imagination. We thought of it and were taught that it's a land without people. And it wasn't. What happened for the Khoi and San as a result of Dutch and English colonialism was that they were alienated and removed from the land and landscapes that that were part of their heritage. And I want to use the word genocide. So people were shot and killed. Large numbers of San and Khoi populations died as a result of a disease brought by Western people who arrived here. And when that happens, the knowledge, the ability to pass knowledge on intergenerationally is completely disrupted. So the other additional thing to understand is to ask, so did it only happen in the long distant past? Or is forms of this still with us? And so if we think about your question about did people learn about the fish traps now from researchers, or did they always know that? So how does intergenerational knowledge pass on? And it can only pass on when you can maintain the relationship to that productive resource. So here's a question for all of you, which I think is really interesting. So we have marine protected areas, and we're going to extend them. What does it mean for people whose access to the ocean is now adjacent to or in a marine protected area? And we know that in Dwesakwebe, in that area along our coast, people find it difficult to access the sea. And when that happens, it's hard for people to pass their intergenerational knowledge to one another. I can't walk with Omakulu because now we have to walk 10 kilometers to get to the place where she can show me how to do certain things. And they can contest amongst themselves as older people. I learn alongside them. We have to think about that. We have to think about the new exclusions that we can make with the intention to actually save the planet. Yeah, but yeah, it's a big debate. It's a big debate, but I think one that we should have. because often I think the people who are most affected by these kind of plans are people with the least impact on natural resources. But yeah, that's probably also a debate, Mike.
All right, thank you all so much. I think that the presenters will be around a little bit, so if you have a burning question you'd like to discuss with them, please find them at lunchtime. Hopefully you all come back for this afternoon, where we will talk about marine spatial planning, and governance, and how we can do that. At 2 o'clock, please. Thank you all so very much for attending. Presenters, please see Tara on your way out.
Right, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Tanya Wagner, and I'm from the Faculty of Law. And I would like to welcome you to the fourth session of the Nelson Mandela University Research Week, aimed at advancing the International Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development. Today's session will engage on the topic of inclusive and sustainable use of coastal and marine resources, ecology, conservation, and small-scale fisheries. I'm honored to introduce the 5 speakers who will be presenting this afternoon. The first paper, entitled The Value of Marine Protected Areas, will be presented online by Professor Mandy Lombard, who is the incumbent Saatchi in Marine and Spatial Planning. The second speaker this afternoon will be Professor Saden Mishi of the Department of Economics, with a paper entitled Valuing Non-Priced Goods, Economic Valuation of Coastal and Marine Resources. Prof. Mishi will be followed by Mrs. Anthea Christoffels du Plessis of the Department of Criminal and Procedural Law, who will be presenting on defining customary fishing rights in South African fisheries law. The penultimate speaker, Dr. Harshali Hamukwaye, a research associate within the Institute for Coastal and Marine Research, will be addressing us online on the status of the shared hake stocks in South Africa and Namibia, with a focus on their long-term sustainability. Mr. Michael De Lange, the COO of the Centre for Law in Action, will be representing Fish Force this afternoon with his paper entitled Illegal Fishing as Transnational Organised Crime and the Fish Force Approach. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to present, and after the last speaker has concluded their presentation, audience members will then be given a further 15 minutes for comments and questions. Thank you, Prof. Lombard. We look forward to your presentation.
Seeing my slide?
Yes, we can hear and see your slides.
No, I just have to figure out how to advance it because I've got a whole bunch of screens open and there we go. All right. Oceans provide ecosystem services, and life on Earth actually depends on these ocean ecosystem services. But what are they? The ocean buffers us against climate change. It produces 50% of the oxygen we breathe. It absorbs 30% of our CO2 emissions. It absorbs 93% of added heat. It also provides coastal protection against storm surges. We have immense genetic resources in the ocean. It also provides us with food. A lot of our transport goes on the ocean. We use it for recreation, and countries with marine coastlines have often very important ocean economies. So these are the ecosystem services that we all need. But what is actually happening to our marine ecosystems? So I just want to show this slide, which takes us through what has happened on the land. The color bar at the bottom represents increasing temperatures. And you can see from when industrialization began a couple of 100 years ago to what the terrestrial environment looks like now, you can see loss of natural habitats and intensification, densification of our human footprint on the land. And the same can be said for the ocean. We started to tame and farm and fish and damage the ocean more recently. And we are now moving from healthy ecosystems on the left-hand side to very transformed and often collapsed ecosystems on the right-hand side. And as we all know, our oceans are warming with climate change. So what are the main threats that we can consider oceans are facing? I like to call the ones on the left the big 5, so overfishing, pollution, habitat destruction, and then 2 of the climate change impacts, ocean warming and ocean acidification. So those might be the big 5, but there are others. There are other things that impact the ocean that are anthropogenic in nature, ocean noise, coastal development, et cetera, and all of these things are impacting the health of our oceans and its ability to provide those ecosystem services that we need. So let's just take a couple of examples. What has happened to the ocean in recent times? So the Pacific bluefin tuna have decreased in stock by 97%. So they are close to extinction. We've lost 1/3 of our global mangroves, which we know buffer us against climate change and also provide blue carbon. In South Africa, our squid crashed in 2013, the picture on the left. Climate change related impacts there. Our lobsters are moving from the west coast down onto the south coast, and our small pelagics such as anchovy and sardine are also moving from the west coast to the south coast, all because of changing temperatures in the ocean. And of course, we have fisheries and top predators that rely on these resources, and now they are shifting. So one of the tools that we use to help us to mitigate all these threats on our marine systems is marine protected areas, which I'll refer to as MPAs. And MPAs come in lots of different shapes and sizes, and they can have multiple objectives. So on the left here, I just list some of these objectives, and obvious ones that you might think of would be to protect ecosystems and habitats and species, but they also need to help us with fisheries. They need to help us have areas where there is no extraction, there is no bycatch. We also need them for sustainable use and tourism and education. We need them. We need them to buffer us against climate change, and we need them to be biodiverse and resilient in order to be able to provide this kind of a buffer. Now, what happens inside marine protected areas? Well, the obvious ones are that if you stop extracting, then your fish stocks and other stocks will build up. Do we have evidence of this? Well, yes. Here's a couple of examples. In Mexico, an MPA allowed an 11 times increase in top predator biomass, and this was in only 10 years after implementation. In Kenya, data from 4 different marine reserves show that for surgeonfish and parrotfish, which are reef fish, after 10 to 30 years of closure, after closure, we have an increase in biomass of our fish. So these are very obvious effects that you might expect. What about egg production? Egg production can also increase inside marine protected areas.
But between 2006 to 2016, we had just about 54. And as of now, we have over 134 postdoctoral research fellows.
Okay, I've got somebody else streaming and talking at the same time as me. Do you want me to stop while you sort that out?
Yes, Prof. I think if you can just hold on a moment. We seem to have linked with another session. The technicians are just busy sorting it out.
49 and 51, so it's just about 50-50 male to female ratio for all the postdocs that we have at the university. And also with regards to nationality, about 50% South African nationals.
Well, maybe it's more interesting.
The other 50% are foreign nationals, which kind of just shows you the depth and the richness of the different researchers that we have. And postdoctoral research fellowship plays a crucial role in advancing knowledge and innovation within universities. You know, the contributions are significant for several reasons. You know, one of the reasons is with regards to research advancements, mentorship and training. So many people also supervise. There's a lot of interdisciplinary collaboration, like myself. I'm a chemist by training, but I'm currently at the physics department, and we're doing interdisciplinary research with some guys from the geosciences department. So that is one of the benefits of being a postdoc student, that you are able to, or fellow, you are able to work in more multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary spaces, you know, and also there is the aspect of societal impact. Many of the postdoctoral research fellows, as you would even hear from the people on stage today, have a lot of the aspects of their research is also focused on the society. So with the research fellowship, it's a big jump from just mostly yourself in the lab or in your office or in all those areas where you're doing research for yourselves. And as a research fellow.
Okay. Am I back? Okay. All right. Are you seeing my big old fat female fecund fish?
Yes, Prof. We can see the big fat fish.
We were talking about what happens inside protected areas, and one of the things that happens is you allow your fish to mature and to get old. And there's the thing called the Bob's hypothesis, which says that these big old fat female fecund fish produce a lot more young than smaller fish of the same species. So you need your fish to get old and big and fat, and you need them to produce many, many young. And that is what you allow to happen in a marine protected area where there is no extraction. So to bring this a little closer to home, if we take the Chokama Marine Protected Area and the Tsitsikamma National Park, which has a marine protected area on the south coast in the Garden Route, let's have a look at what's happening inside these MPAs. Now, both of them are MPAs, but Tsitsikamma is mostly protected from fishing, both from the shore and from the ocean, whereas Chokama is protected only from the ocean. So what happens to the species composition inside these MPAs? Well, in Tsitsikamma, you can see the slices of the pie, all the different colors are different species, and you'll see that there are far fewer species in Chokama, despite the fact that it's very similar habitat, similar oceanographic conditions. And in Tsitsikamma, importantly, the blacktail, which is a small herbivorous species, is only a quarter of the abundance of all the different type of the richness of all the different species. But in Chokama, where you are allowed to fish from the shore, the blacktail goes up to 57%. And this is an indicator that your ecosystem is not well balanced. It's not functioning properly. When blacktails start to increase to this proportion, it can be seen in the Mediterranean. Similar species also are on the up, and the top predators and species richness is on the down once you start impacting these marine systems. So what about spillover? Spillover is when a marine protected area starts to export fish to surrounding areas, and fishing people then benefit from these exported fish. We refer to that as spillover. And frequently the fishing grounds adjacent to nicely functioning MPAs allow increased yield of these species. MPAs also export larvae. So not only are they exporting the adults, but they're exporting the larvae. And this study from the Great Barrier Reef shows that fishing grounds adjacent to marine protected areas are receiving larvae of the fish of interest. Back home again in Chokama MPA, we have shown that the adult spillover and the larval dispersal from the marine protected area do not disadvantage adjacent fishers, so shore anglers and boat anglers. And in this case, the Roman, which we refer to usually as the red Roman, after the MPA was implemented in 1990 up until more recently, areas outside are experiencing more of the adults as well as the larvae. So marine protected areas foster the recovery of species and of habitats and of ecological processes. And if they function really, really well, they can offset the impacts of climate change. But they have to be diverse and they have to be functioning well before they can provide that sort of service. But MPAs also have economic benefits. So this is a picture from a paper on 2 villages in Fiji, and the village that is the blue lines, the blue spider diagram, does not have an MPA, and the village that is in purple does have an MPA. And if you take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different metrics and you measure them, the village with the MPA is doing much better in terms of income, housing, luxury items, fish catch, and growth of income. So this is all because of the existence of that MPA in that village. And this picture can be replicated and is replicated across the world in many situations. But all of these benefits that MPAs provide are only provided if there's full protection of the MPA. So this business of zoning at some fishing, some this, some bottom fishing, some pelagic fishing, that doesn't work. You need your MPA to be fully protected from extraction. Now, why do we say this? Why do we say MPAs must be fully protected? And this picture provides a nice diagram of how fishing intensity, starting with the ecosystem on the left, which is diverse, lots of top predators, a lot of abundance of stuff. And then as you go down this food web and you fish down this food web, you can destroy that area and have very little left on the bottom with high fishing intensity. So now what happens when you fish down the food web? Well, when you start fishing, your ecosystem integrity and function is very good, shown on the right by that black arrow, and on the left by your dollars rolling through as you bringing in your fish from that particular area or your catch. And then you start to overexploit it, you fish too much, and you start to impact the ecosystem, and this is what happens. You can fish just as financially sustainably, but you are fishing a bottom fishery, a trash fishery, and you're sending all of your produce to aquaculture, but you're still making a lot of money. So you can sustainably financially fish down the food web, but ecologically it is not sustainable. So MPAs are one of the tools that we use to guard us against climate change and against the collapse of ecosystem services, but they often fail. And the reason that they fail, there are many reasons. There could be inadequate funding for the NPA. It could have been poorly designed. It could have been designed with no consultation of the local community. There could be lack of political backing. And of course, there can be very poor management and enforcement, lack of enforcement and lack of compliance, with insufficient protection provided for your species and your habitats inside. So because this is Research Week and we wanted to share a little bit of our research, I'm just going to summarize that by saying we conduct research across the biological sciences, the social sciences, economics, and governance in order to be able to advise on the design and the management and the monitoring of effective MPAs. And these are MPAs that are not fished or extracted from. If you want to know more about South Africa's Marine Protected Area Estate and some of the successes that we've had in the last few years, this website is a really nice resource and you may go and explore that particular website. And that is all from me. I hope I've managed to catch up a little bit of time, and thank you for hosting me.
Thank you very, very much, Prof. Lombard. Is Prof. Mishi here? Yes. Welcome, Prof. You may set yourselves up in front. You'll have 15 minutes to present. I did actually introduce you a little bit earlier. Yes, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Goods, and I have 10 minutes to do justice to that, so I'll try my best. I'll be very economic with time. All right, from an economic point of view, we study choice, individual choices, and by that we say you have alternatives of decision to make or to choose from, but then you choose one that better, improve or increases your utility, you maximize your utility. This is just satisfaction. So you chose to be here, not into next venue, because you think you will benefit more by being here. So you have an alternative to be home, to be in another venue, but you chose to be here. But understanding that, we are then able to put a value on some other items that cannot be priced. And that is the general notion where I'm coming from. Apologies if there's an economist, I'm trying to explain it in the simplest terms so that we get to understand when we get to the valuation method that I'm going to talk about. So for example, when we look at the marine resources, we either get food from there, we either just get some enjoyment from there, just being closer to the resource, we either just get relaxation or actually draw some income. So there are many, many things that you can draw from there. And you choose, hopefully, there is that kind of opportunity to choose that particular resource, to utilize it, to access it, to whatnot, just because you think that is going to give you the best out of, compared to the alternative. So we can measure that utility either in a reviewed way or actually in a preference-based approach. Preference-based approach is that I can ask you that tomorrow, do you want to go and spend time at the beach or to be in the library or to be doing something else? You can just tell me. But when it comes to tomorrow, you can actually end up doing something different because we just like saying this is what I plan to do. But with the reviewed, it's like I'm actually monitoring you and say, for example, what the actual behavior that you have taken, what is the actual action that you have taken. So that is observed pieces of information. So we have those kind of ways to measure or to assess utility. And I'm mentioning this because it does matter. If you ask me, how much I feel I benefit from the ocean, I can tell you. But it's different to actually know exactly what I'm benefiting. So the two are totally different. Sometimes we overstate or understate the value of something because of many reasons, many factors. So that is the angle that I'm coming from here. All right, so natural resources, we know that they are very crucial. I'm not going to speak much about, I'm speaking to the converted, that natural resources needs to be protected and the like. But we can't protect them if we can't value them. And there's no price to it. And how do we value? Because generally we have an understanding of price and value being synonymous. That is the general idea that we have as human beings. So we need then to be able to better do valuation so that we can have management systems that actually resonate or that can actually be sustainable for that particular matter. Because from valuation, you can actually be able to see how do you charge even access fees and etc. to be able to finance the management system. So from economic thoughts, value was considered to be synonymous with importance, that, okay, it's more important, but what is that important? Something that is more important to me might not be important to you. The price of an item may differ from its value, so that even if we price it, we know that the value can be different from that. So there's an idea to establish just the price for some items and examine how actual market prices confirm this particular idea. But what is that just item? Issues of measurement are very much crucial because we want to get total economic value, but there are different aspects that can be considered. The direct use, indirect uses, existence value. Just because the ocean is there and is there is a value to it. But there's a value of actually utilizing it. So to understand that there's fish in the ocean is one thing. It's existing, it is there. To actually have to get to catch the fish and have to consume or get an income from the fish is a totally different aspect. So these are the issues that come when you try to put value on any of the assets that we're talking about. So there's what we call the water and diamond paradox that is used in economics to get to understand how to value something. What is more valuable, water or a diamond? If I ask which one has got a higher price, possibly you can tell me. But which one is more value, you can't really possibly relate to the what? To the issue of price. So that is really the aspect. So we come from the founding fathers of economics, Worth of Nation, saying, okay, value is possibly like how useful the product is to you, to a point where we're talking about, look, there's quite a lot of aspect to take into consideration. The last unit that you consume or you utilize, whether it's going to be there tomorrow or not going to be there tomorrow, the value actually matters. I think I'm speaking the language now of sustainable use of resources. So that is where the mapping is what is coming through here. And I'm not going to spend much time here because I want to demonstrate, because sometimes when you see how valuation has happened, you get to understand now the theory. So I don't want you to make you all economists, but just to appreciate that there is something to do with economics. You can access some of the works on the QR codes here that has been done. So if we are valuing a non-market product, sometimes we look at it from the benefit value transfers. This is just basically, there are some other studies that have done it very well and have measured in another country. We can actually derive and then make that particular value the same that we assign to our resource that we have here. but there are many differences in terms of, the quality of the resource. Look at just the beach. Maybe it doesn't have a blue flag kind of status compared to another. So there are many things that you can talk about. But that is the benefit value. It has got its limitation. Then the reviewed preference, you now understand the reviewed preference that you talked about, that is actually people, you have observed their behavior, the actual behavior. And that is done through hedonic pricing. What do we mean? We are saying that this is an intrinsic value. You cannot be able to actually just measure it, but by what people do, you can actually be able to ascertain. So if you look at it, that properties in Summerstrand, the properties that have got a better view of the sea, they have got a certain price premium on them. You actually work from that particular price premium to determine how much people value the ocean view because of the premium that is put on price on those particular properties compared to the one that don't have what? That unique viewness. That is actually from a hedonic pricing point of view. So we also have different alternative methods. I'm going to skip them for now. Then on the stated preference, it is what people are going to say. So you can actually go to the contingent valuation and ask people, how much do you value this? And they can tell you. But remember, I told you the problem with that, right? You can say anything else because you are not going to pay the price anyway. So there's nothing that is making you actually reflect the true value. But yes, methods have been used around that. Then the discrete choice modeling is where you actually put a number of scenarios, a number of particular options, and the person is saying, I would prefer this kind of option A or B. I have that as examples later on. So we have used these methods, and the ones in red are the ones that I'm going to quickly highlight now, how we have managed to apply. So it's one from each, and I believe that as we have more than 5 minutes post, the flag is not yet up. No, I work from economics. It's just like, the marginality. We deal with marginality. So my flag is 5 minutes when I see that. Okay, so what happens then is that you go to, we're working on the Sandys and Swartkrop estuaries. So you go there, there are people that are going there for different activities. One, to just relax. Two, to actually fish, not for food, others, but others are also fishing to get what? To get to food. Others are actually, going there, they fishing so that they can be able to sell and get income. Others are just going there for, it's a meetup place for them. So people go to the estuaries for quite diverse reasons. Now, when you are there at the estuary, we are going on with our survey. So we ask you, okay, you here? Where are you from? Okay, maybe you've come even out of town or just by the neighboring, suburb where you just walk to get in there. Or you have come a couple of kilometers away, you have drove to there. What are the costs for you to come here? All right? So you account fuel, any kind of cost for you to come here. When you are here, what are the expenditures, so the eats that you get, and any kind of we can call them inputs. Let's say you're buying bait, right? So you also buying from there. So we account for all those particular costs, the expenditure. You are spending that because there is only that particular, now I'm on that particular point now, at 5 minutes. So you are spending that amount of money only because there is this particular estuary. If there was no estuary, you were not going to drive from where you're coming from and buy all the eats that you are buying and buy the bait and sit here. You are only doing it because there is this estuary, right? You could have been somewhere else. So we try to account for all those expenditures just because of this particular estuary. Then we ask you, yes, you came here today. How often do you come? Okay, once a week. Okay, are you consistent in that once a week? So in a way, 52 times a year? So we're trying to account for all that. And we are assuming that this is a quite representative sample, and if you go there several times, you're trying to get also on average how many people are always at the estuary at any day. And a typical person, how much are they spending in terms of them coming there? So you can see that we have that total expenditure, and we are able then to apply the two concepts that you have mentioned. First, if we look at that, let's say, I think my screen just covered there, but this is Sanders River and this is Swartkrop. So on average, 47 people were found to be accessing the Sanders River, for example, on any particular day that we visited on average. On Swartkrop, that was 65. Now, when we count with what they are spending there, those particular individuals, these are the amounts that we can end up having. 916,358 for Sundays and 2,382 million. This is on average daily expenditure, excluding capital expenditure and license fee and any other sunk costs that we can talk about. So we exclude all that. Look, if we actually look at that and say, by the number of trips, if these are the only people that are coming, only these ones, and they came as the number of times that they've mentioned, multiplied by the number of times that they come per year, this is the actual expenditure that they spend in the estuaries. Just because there's an estuary. They could have been somewhere else, but because there's this particular resource, they came through there. And we know that when you go to the next shop and you buy a pack of the chips that you want to go and eat at the beach, that particular amount of money is not going to stay in that particular shop, right? The shopkeeper is going to be paid some salary out of it. And when they are paid a salary out of it, then they go and buy bread for the kids at home. Right? And the shop that receives also that sells the bread, they are also going to pay their shopkeeper something, and goes on. We call that in economics the multiplier effect. So the money in Nelson Mandela Bay multiplied 1.6 times. Okay, it differs with the region. Multiplies 1.6. So if we apply that, this is the overall expenditure that is coming through. Then, now, if we continue with the multiplication, I see there's 2 minutes here. If you continue with the multiplication, you can be reading through here. Can you see we're building? Then you see that the actual contribution of Swartkrop, for example, to the local economy is coming between 17 million to 26 million a year. And for Sundays, it's 5.6 million and around there. We are able to put the value because of the activities that are happening there. There is what we call consumer surplus, which is very much critical now to say, yes, you might be paying all these expenditures and whatnot. Access is free. There's no other cost that you are incurring. But how much were you willing to pay? Are you willing to pay to access this? So we do our regression analysis, and we look at the daily trip cost, negative of daily trip, divided by the coefficient on daily trip cost. We get what we call consumer surplus. This is the amount of money that people are still willing to pay to access. That means even if you put an access fee, on average, a person in Swartkrop is still willing to pay about 333. That was 270 to 333. And on average, someone at Sanders River, they are actually willing to pay up to 1,000 more than what they are paying to just get to access. So when you're talking about management now, if you're talking about access fees, if you're talking about anything else, permitting and whatnot, you look around the possibility of exploiting. But it's not advisable to exploit all these particular consumer surplus, because the more you do that, remember we're talking about an average. Other people actually fall off, no longer using the resource, and it limits this. So the greater the surplus, also the greater room that you have, that there's more diversity in terms of access and the like. All right, I think I will just end up here highlighting the different kind of methods, because also the behavior of individual does matter. We need to get to understand the behavior of the individuals. So there is a behavioral process that we need to understand. The behavioral antecedents, the intended behavior, where we get our stated preference, but then the actual behavior. So we need to get to understand the actual behavior so that we are able to fully measure that. But human behavior is not just like straightforward. We know there are a lot of biases, there's a lot of changes that happen. We say tastes and preferences do differ. The same in reality. If you're enjoying to go to the beach more often, now because of the rising sea and whatnot. We see what has been happening on N2. You no longer get interested to be at the beach because you think that there's more threat. So your behavior can change. And those values that we have need then to be revised because things do change. All right? So yes, I pause here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mishi. We look forward to engaging with you afterwards. I can see some people were nodding and there were some shaking their heads, so I think there's going to be some interesting comments and questions coming out of your presentation. I'd now like to hand over to Mrs. Anthea Christophels du Plessis. Yes, speaker number 3. Welcome.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm uncomfortable with this thing in my hand. Right, so my topic is defining customary fishing rights in South African fisheries law. So I'm going to try and not be a lawyer about it. And already I'm panicking because that's my go-to. Starting off, just historically, I think for most of us, particularly my generation, when we speak historically, the date that always comes to mind is 1652, as though nothing else existed or mattered before then. And when we look specifically at marine resource usage and the existence of indigenous communities in South Africa, that has existed for generations since time immemorial, way beyond that particular well-known 1652 date. And so the history is important insofar as the history needs to be acknowledged and the community's practices as they are continuing throughout the generations and what we experience currently need to be reflective of that, particularly within our legal frameworks. Right. Then just looking at the historical governance at a glance with regards to our fisheries particularly. And I know the first speaker already touched on some of the aspects with regards to the establishment of marine protected areas. So our legal framework was essentially and originally set up in order to create this industrial fisheries economy. And so essentially to achieve that, the governments at the time were very strict insofar as the allocation of rights, defining resource users and ensuring that the resource was exclusively and essentially only available for the maximum exploitation for purposes of commercial use. And so there was never any recognition or any participation of any kind, obviously, given the political climate at the various stages from our colonial period right throughout the apartheid regime. These indigenous communities never obviously featured as part of the equation, let alone as being considered as resource users and as stewards of the resources. So we have then the law at that stage cumulatively, including the racial-based laws, excluding the communities from accessing lawfully and legally their resources. And that was also as a result of the forced removals and similar types of deprivation and dispossession that the communities, particularly the coastal indigenous communities, had experienced. I'm so tempted to ask, are there any questions? Because I think I'm having a lecture. Okay, going back, or rather moving forward. Let's fast forward now. We are nearly little over 3 decades into our democracy. And of course, our democracy was framed under the terms of a reformation of some sorts. And so our incumbent democratic government, the original government of national unity, came in with very big, bold ideas with regards to what a transformed fisheries would look like. And so they spent a lot of time and established a lot of committees that had to consider and look exactly at how the fisheries rights regime would be transformed, with regards to also then now including what was then termed historically disadvantaged individuals, particularly looking at communities that had a particular interest and traditional marine resource usage history. And so all of that culminated into what we have now as our main piece of legislation regulating fishing rights in South Africa, which is the Marine Living Resources Act of 1998. And initially what was included there was what was known as a subsistence fishing category. So after all of the rigmaroles and all of these committees and various panels giving the government rather proposals with regards to how to include and how to redistribute, so to speak, these fishing rights and to be more inclusive and to ensure participation of the majority of our country, they came up with what was known as a subsistence fishing rights category. And post that, so 1st September 1998 was when the Marine Living Resources Act came into effect. Post that, government was still unsure as to what exactly they meant with what is a subsistence fishing category, because it was very clearly and narrowly defined or limited to people who fish for subsistence purposes, in other words, to consume their catch, and nothing really beyond that. And so the government then had set up another committee, which was known as the Subsistence Fishing Panel, the SFTG, to clarify exactly who government had envisaged should form part of the subsistence fishing category. And the SFTG had then provided government with a final report in 2000. So government was then aware of the fact that of the 147 fishing communities that had been part of the study and part of the investigation by this expert panel, many of these communities actually were identified by this panel as having an historical right to fish and have an indigenous right to the marine resources. And they made certain recommendations for government to consider with regards to potentially amending the law. And so guess what? I think that whole panel recommendation was eventually put into a file 13 or whatever the file is now. Nothing happened since then. Communities were obviously left dissatisfied and ultimately had to approach our courts for relief. And that came about in various different courts looking at different communities across the coast complaining about their dire situation and their lack of recognition effectively. So I've just highlighted some of the more commonly known ones there. So before we have, or before the existence of the small-scale fishing policy, which is currently part of the framework, there was a Equality Court decision by the Western Cape High Court at the time, which was the first class action by fishing communities across our 4 coastal provinces. And they approached the court to say that, in fact, the Section 19 subsistence fishing category is inadequate insofar as it fails to recognize and properly accommodate our traditional fishing rights. And so the government had initially reneged and was eventually forced to come to the table and sit down with the representatives of the communities to formulate a comprehensive plan with regards to achieving proper recognition for these coastal traditional fishing communities. And so, pending the consideration of the litigation on the merits, the court, the Equality Court that is, had issued an extensive order in terms of, or by which the negotiations between the fishing representatives and government should be guided in the negotiating talks. And so we have, post that we had the National Task Team in 2007, so another little panel of experts and also community representatives across the coastal provinces sitting down and discussing exactly what their issues are, what their right of access should be, etc. And eventually the government had first produced the small-scale fisheries policy in 2012. So it is quite a drawn-out, lengthy process to have even gotten to that stage. Then in 2013, the Western Cape High Court was then also seized with a different issue with regards to the petition by the Langebaan Lagoon traditional trek net fishers, as they are known, with regards to the establishment of the marine protected area within the lagoon and the implications of establishing that lagoon without their participation in any way or form. And then lastly, we had the most recent Gongose judgment from the Supreme Court of Appeal that actually was considered by two of the lower courts before the Supreme Court of Appeal delivered final judgment. And there we have the first time that South African, in the fishing rights space, we've had the framing of a customary fishing right recognized, and the court there confirming that even though the legislation at the time that the MLRA was first promulgated, there was no mention or recognition of a customary fishing right explicitly or impliedly, that did not in any way take away or deprive the communities from their customary rights to fish. Then a second bite, that all happened in the interim while this new fisheries policy was being rolled out. So the policy itself cannot operate in the absence of the legal mechanisms that gives legal effect to it. And so the department concerned had then, via the minister obviously, promulgated regulations, which was the 2015 small-scale fishery regulations, which clearly then also set out a criteria for purposes of verifying and registering those persons that have then come forward that fell within this definition of what constitutes a small-scale fisher. And then the last sort of cog in the framework, if I can use that reference, was the amendment to the Marine Living Resources Act itself, in which then the small-scale fisheries framework was then legalized, and that came into effect in 2016. So this all happened under the negotiation and with the input of the fishing communities and their various representatives, or so they claim. The reality speaks to something very different. There is still a lot of uncertainty with regards to the impact of the Gongose judgment. What does it mean with regards to claiming and asserting a customary fishing right? While the small-scale fishery policy is very clear with regards to government's acknowledgement of the fact that that right exists, that there are small-scale fishers that have a customary fishing right in particular, and also with regards to the use of the terminology and the category or the classification that is currently used in the legislation, not going very far with regards to defining what a customary fishing right actually is. So the question is, where are the customary fishing rights after the dust, so to speak, settles? The further reality is with regards to, or is clearly identifiable with regards to the day-to-day plights of these fishing communities, the traditional fishing communities. There I've just highlighted some of the last 2 years or so, some media reports, and then also some ancillary issues that have arisen again within our courts, if we can think of the Shell judgment and the ocean mining judgment with regards to the lack of consultation of these communities where government are issuing licenses and want to exploit our oceans for purposes of benefiting our country as a whole, but to the exclusion of these original stewards from also participating in these decision-making processes. And then lastly, my proposal insofar as trying to start with a solution. We cannot speak about consultation or participation or consent even if we cannot identify who these communities are. And so I propose from my research that there is a new category of fishing rights that is distinguishable from just merely an ordinary small-scale fisher that particularly identifies customary fishing rights. Insofar as that classification would then recognize this pre-existing right of these indigenous communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Christoffels du Plessis, for that fascinating presentation. Yeah, I'm hoping that there are going to be some questions and some interrogation of a proposed definition that essentially could link up very nicely with some other activities looking at legal protection given to associated traditional knowledge or traditional knowledge that is particularly associated with the use of biodiversity. So I found that particularly interesting. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dr. Hashali Hamukwaya, who will also be presenting online.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Moderator. Let me just.
Good afternoon, Professor Hamukwaya, and welcome to this afternoon session. Whenever you're ready.
Are you able to see my slide?
Not yet.
Oh, wait. Let's see there. No, wait a minute. I need to come here and then share the screen. And not sure now. Share. What about right now? You're able to see?
Yes, Prof, we can see your screen.
Very good. All right. I will go through this very quickly. It's about hake stocks in the region, in the Namibia and South African waters, in particular deep water hake.
That one of the challenges that we had is that one of the materials that we use...
Apologies, Doctor. If we can just wait a moment. We seem to have connected to one of the neighboring sessions. We're just going to sort it out quickly. Apologies.
So with the research budget that we have and the amount of crude extracts that we work with, it's not ideal.
Apologies, Dr. Hamakwaya. We seem to have linked to one of the neighboring sessions, so they're just going to sort it out quickly. If you can maybe just wait a moment, we'll let you know when you can proceed.
Compounds. So we have successfully come up with a method that works for the isolation of those compounds. The compounds have been isolated, and they are currently doing structural elucidation of those single compounds, and then following that we'll...
What should I do now? There's competing audio.
Yes, Doctor, if you can just wait a moment. The technicians, have they sorted it out?
Yes.
Can he proceed? Okay, Doctor, you may proceed. Apologies for the interruption. Thank you.
I can proceed now?
Yes, you may proceed. Thank you.
All right. So I got valuable information from colleagues, Dr. John Kafena, Dr. Paulus Kainge, and also Dr. Johan Augustine. The first two are from, they are at NATMIC, that's National Marine Information and Research Center in Swakopmund, and Dr. Augustine is at South Africa, the Deep Sea Troll Industry Association. We know that the hake stocks, namely the shallow Cape hake and deepwater hake, are very valuable fish in this region. And over the past 30 years or so, South Africa and Namibia have, together with their development partners, have invested heavily in fishery research and management of these stocks. So I will make a very short presentation on the research results as well as the current management protocols and future outlook for the hake stocks as I view these very important resources in the region. So we talk about the value of these resources. This is just some of the information I received recently. This was a study done by Genesis Analytics on behalf of South African Deep Sea Troll Industry Association. And as you can see, direct employment, these are huge numbers that are employed by the industry of 7,000 and reduce a little bit to 6,000 plus. And also the hake deep sea troll fishery sales of several billions, 4.3 billion in 2020. And if you look at other, if you just go to the last row there, the total socioeconomic contribution, and this is just for the hake fisheries in South Africa, 5.4 billion in 2020. And for Namibia, you know that the export value of fish and fishery products amounts to roughly 10.5 billion in 2020, and fisheries contribute to gross domestic product in 2019 was around 4%. And there are a lot of people employed in the sector. For the Namibian information that we have, this is for the entire fisheries, but we know that hake is account for about 70% of the industry, the fisheries. So here, this is the role of science. I want to remove this. The role of science in terms of getting best available information that could be used for management of hake resources. So there have been a lot of investment in research by the two countries. And the best available information that we have so far from throat surveys, from genetics, and other research indicates that the two hake stocks are shared between South Africa and Namibia. There have been studies of 25 years of studies on transboundary hake surveys that provide scientific information that deep water hake is shared between Namibia and South Africa. And also using mitochondrial DNA and nuclear microsatellites studied by Henriquez indicates that a single stock of deep water hake in this region. Other studies using gonadosomatic index also found that deep water hake is found in South African waters, and there are also other studies that are indicating similar results. So there have been a lot of effort in terms of investing in collecting this data. As you can see on the map here, the throat surveys covering the entire distributional area of hake in the region. And these informations are not only important at national level, but could also be important in feeding into regional stock assessment. This is additional information on the life cycle of hake in the region. In the first figure you can see, this is for the juvenile hake fish defined from 0 to 35 centimeter in length. And you can see that the reddish and the yellowish color, those are very small fish of that's about 0 to 5 centimeter in length. And you can see they are very much in the South African waters from say Port Nolos right up to Cape of Good Hope and in shallow water. And then if you move to the next figure, you will see that those are the fish from 40 centimeter and larger. Here you can see that they are much more in the slope and also distributed along the entire coast and also on the east coast of South Africa. So the smaller one, as they move out from spawning areas and so on, they migrate up north, right up to the Namibian border with Angola, and also they move and they grow and also move towards the slope, and you can also see that they move on the South Africa east coast. So these are the percentage of Mauritius paradoxus, that's a deep sea hake in Namibia and South Africa. Again, it's basically the same information we presented in the previous figures. Small juveniles, largely in South African waters, and also the bigger one in South African waters, with Namibia getting these fish basically migrating from South African waters. This is the status of hake in South Africa. It's deduced from the stock assessment and other information about the status of the resources, that's the the fishing pressure here in the stock status. Deepwater hake is right up here, and you can see that both the fishing pressure and the stock status are optimal. So there's not that much concern about the status of the stock. It seems it is in good state. Similarly for Namibia, this one, the line, the dotted line here, this is the long-term trend. And you can see during the last 5 years or so, the biomass is more or less in line with the long-term trend. So scientists, I think what I'm getting from them or from the interpretation is that there's not that much concern, at least for now. So there's also this certification of the fisheries in Namibia and in South Africa by Marine Steward Council. And certifications are very important because you can have access to markets such as the European Union and others. You can get fair price or good price when your fishery is certified and other benefits. But there are also responsibility in terms of the industry and the government. So they have to work very, very hard to keep those standards as required by the certifying authority. And these include that you should conduct regular surveys to understand your abundance of the resources, and you should have reliable estimation of catches, conduct regular scientific assessment, the resources, management rule for setting annual catch limits, independent scientific observers, adequate monitoring, control, and surveillance, and also enforcement, and measures to reduce ecological impact, such as damage to the seabed, or how to manage discards during catching operations. So with then these requirements and so the collaboration is necessary between the two countries. That's why they have signed a memorandum of understanding to facilitate the easy of communication and sharing of information and data that will aid in and facilitate the ongoing and improved management of these resources on long-term basis. So the memorandum, under that MOU, the parties will make data available to each other, the data that's being used in stock assessment, and also they can meet, review any issues related to data, and so on. They can meet annually on this. In terms of management and governance approach, these two countries have no joint or cooperative management shared stocks. Each one is setting its own TAC, and we have a rich amount of science which is suggesting, not suggesting, I think, we are even using the word irrefutable evidence that the deepwater hake is shared. So the countries have created this important entity, a regional collaborative entity, the current convention. So progress has been made in that regard, and BCCA structures in place, the ministerial conference and others, including working groups that are specifically dealing with hake stocks, the Dimensional Working Group. In fact, as we speak, this working group is in Cape Town doing its work, and it has been in operation for past several years now. So one study by Smaila has demonstrated the potential economic losses due to non-cooperation between South Africa and Namibia on deepwater hake. I think there were numbers in that report mentioned in terms of what we are losing. And Frankie Baker, in her master thesis, also concluded that joint efforts are lowest. These are efforts like research effort, management, and so on. They are lowest, and joint profit are maximized if the two countries cooperate regionally and act as a sole owner for deepwater hake. And also moving from the current scenario of each one is doing his or her own work would roughly double the profit. So collaboration between South Africa and Namibia can enhanced within the Benguela Current Convention to ensure long-term sustainability through, for example, joint or cooperative management of hake resources as contained in the BTC Convention text, and also other instruments such as FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries of 1995 and the Law of the Sea. So, Madam Moderator, I thank you. These views and opinion I expressed in these last slides are mine and have nothing to do with the colleagues I mentioned earlier that have provided me with data. So thank you very much, and any questions, here to try to respond.
Thank you very much, Doctor. If we can ask that you please just stay online until after the last speaker has presented. That's when the audience members will be addressing comments and questions to the respective speakers. But I just want to thank you for your very, very interesting presentation. And it, for me, always raises very interesting questions about the increase in for instance, mining activities off the West Coast, and what the potential impacts would be on any sustainable management plan of certain types of fish stocks. But thank you very much for that. I would now like to hand over to our final speaker for this afternoon, Mr. Michael de Lange from Fish Force. Thank you.
My name is Michael de Lange from Fish Force. This afternoon, my presentation has been quite practical in nature, and I'm looking at the organized nature of transnational organized crime in the fisheries sector and the Fish Force approach. So in a nutshell, I won't spend too much time on Fish Force, but basically what we've done, we've established academies at various universities within the SADC region. We started in 2016 and in South Africa first, and we moved into Kenya, although not technically part of the SADC region, but we moved into Kenya first. And we opened up academies with a focus on training capacity building of law enforcement officials within the marine space, marine fisheries. We talk about training, we talk about informal training, formal qualifications, just to try to professionalize the sector, not only in South Africa, but also in the Southern African area. We also do a lot of post-training support. What that means is once we've trained law enforcement officers, we provide them with some type of support from an investigative point of view, in terms of any current cases they are busy with and how we can assist. We also look at evidence-based research for the purpose of protecting marine living resources. And we look at different technologies, innovations to help combat fisheries crime and illegal poaching through the development of fish identification apps, gamification, utilizing Skylight, AIS tracking for vessels, etc. Based on this, our core function of Fish Force is based on research. We find that there's a severe shortage in terms of capacity for the monitoring, compliance and surveillance, as well as enforcement aspects in terms of fisheries crime. We find that many of the players, the role players and actors simply don't have the capacity to investigate, to prosecute in combating IUU fishing. What we also find is information sharing is key. When we move into alternative countries, we want to make sure that we have individuals that are from different countries sitting in the same room so we can identify each other when we know each other and we get to know a person. For example, Kenya and Tanzania work a lot in those countries. If you get to know someone, you can contact them easy via phone, via emails, etc. So we really try and promote that cooperation between the different countries and different enforcement agencies. What's also very important, we find, is to facilitate the civil society, involvement of communities. Of late, we find in Mexico they have the vigilante fishermen. In Indonesia, they make use of the community. And in South Africa, we have what we call the Honorary Marine Conservation Officers Program. So the Honorary Marine Conservation Officers are supporting fishery control officers. They don't have the same powers of FCOs, but they come from the community. And we've actually had some interesting stories when it comes to the Honorary Marine Conservation Officers on the West Coast, where we had one individual who is an Honorary Marine Conservation Officer actually helped arrest his own brother, who is a poacher. So quite an interesting story, but involving the communities in that enforcement aspect has had some wonderful results, like I said, in Indonesia, Mexico, as well as South Africa. And then again, is looking at different innovative solutions, technology, etc. Also, not to mention that picture of the drone just reminded me, we also try and help SAPS with developing workshops to identify photography crime scenes of fisheries utilizing drones. So what we do is we establish chapters in each country through the university, and they then link with the relevant law enforcement agencies in those particular countries. We then offer the training and qualifications to all the law enforcement agencies. In South Africa, we focus on the police, fisheries, sandparks, Cape Nature, etc., municipal law enforcement as well, and we do the same in the other respective countries. We want to try and professionalize the sector and link it to appointments. We also work with international bodies such as United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Interpol, Ali TrainNet, etc., and try and impart the information we receive from them to our regional experts in the Southern African area. We also form part of Operation Bakisa, the Ocean Crime Priority Committee. That's a platform that we use to disseminate information that we learn through research, our training, etc., as well as the SADC Regional Fisheries Task Team that we also sit on. So that's just a map to show where we are currently with the red dots. You can see where we are active. We started in South Africa and in Kenya. We've done a little bit of work in Angola, not too much, and more recently we are focusing on some inland states. Inland fisheries, the Great Lakes in Malawi and Zimbabwe and Zambia. We've only recently started doing work there in the beginning of this year. And we've also done some work on the Western Indian Ocean rim, some of the small island states of Seychelles, Mauritius, etc. So what are our vulnerable species? In South Africa, and again that differs from country to country, but in South Africa we're focusing on abalone and the West Coast rock lobster. Just another image of the abalone. But the market is expanding. We're finding increasing activity in terms of not only abalone and West Coast rock lobster, but also mud crab, as you can see in that picture. Shark fin is also something that's increasing. For example, in Mozambique, they have a massive issue with rays. All right. And I know the first speaker this afternoon, Professor Lombard, spoke about the decline by 97% of the Pacific blue ocean or bluefin tuna. There's an image, giant bluefin tuna from the Pacific, and linking it to the economics professor, supply and demand. There's no more supply. Look at the price, $3.1 million for one fish. One fish, giant bluefin tuna. So why do we bother? Okay, so over 90% of the world's fish stocks are overexploited through IUU fishing, overfishing. Obviously that threatens food security. It's a massive issue. It represents a massive industry, $143 billion industry in terms of the illegal, illicit activities in organized crime within fisheries. And more importantly, it harms your legitimate fishes, your small scale, your persistent fishes. It harms them mostly. All right. Not to say, it destroys marine ecosystems, damages the economy in states. And just in sub-Saharan Africa back in 2006 is estimated at $1 billion due to IUU fishing alone. So what we find is that a lot of countries, and we've worked also closely with some organizations down in Australia, and they find IUU fishing as more as a resource management issue. We have identified that IUU fishing in most instances have elements of organized crime. So there are other elements of racketeering, fraud, corruption, human trafficking, firearm trafficking. More and more we've been working with the United Nations International Labour Organization looking at forced labor on board fishing vessels. So there are always a high instance of elements of other organized crime elements. It's not just a resource management issue. The unfortunate side of treating it as an IUU as a resource management issue is that it imposes low penalties. Low administrative penalties doesn't actually change behavior. Okay, we're trying to impose and advocate the high priority of it, that it has linkages to other elements of organized crime, and that we should prosecute according to prevention of organized crime, which comes with stiffer, harsher penalties. The reality is that the Chinese gangs and organized crime has been involved in the Western Cape for many years. Taiwanese, and there was a game called the Table Mountain Game, and they've been offering in the Western Cape, not only in the Western Cape. We have evidence and proof of shipping of smuggled abalone all the way to Pretoria, Johannesburg, landlocked countries like Lesotho, Swaziland, also exporting. It even goes to Zimbabwe. This came to the fore with a shipment that was seized in Durban port for over 1 million Mandrax tablets seized in involvement of the Chinese shipment. And that really opened up the can of worms when it came to the organized crime of the Chinese triads within South Africa. And what we find interesting also is that the Chinese triad is involved with the Cape gangsters, and they pay them in ingredients to make tik, methamphetamine, Mandrax. So they don't actually pay in cash or money, they barter in ingredients to make drugs. And then what they do is they get the Cape gangsters to literally go and dive out the abalone in the Western Cape in particular. Okay, so what we've seen from a case for State versus Miller, they see that the sentences imposed is really nothing to change behavior. It's more of an occupational hazard and seen as a normal running business expense. But nothing changes. If we look at another case with a local case in terms of State versus Bluchno, there were 9 persons arrested, of which 2 were Chinese nationals. And they had to indicate ties with linkages to syndicates in mainland China as well as Hong Kong. Again, this particular case, we had a 20-year sentence, which was quite a game changer. The reason for that was linked to organized crime nature. It was prosecuted in terms of the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, not necessarily according to the Marine Living Resources Act. Other examples, as mentioned, I said there's a cash-free barter system where they pay with ingredients to make drugs, methamphetamine, basically tik. And also what we're finding in that case in 2007 is that $43,000 worth of abalone can be traded for about $64,000 worth of methamphetamine. So you can actually see the increase in value for drugs. So that is obviously causing a spike in that type of cash-free trade or bartering system. Okay, this is another interesting example. Here we have 9 FCOs from the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, 9 FCOs involved with corruption in abalone poaching back in 2018. So corruption is a massive issue. So what can be done? We need to recognize IUU fishing more as the organized nature that it is in most instances, rather than just a compliance issue. So more than just a resource environmental issue, it's more than a compliance issue. We need to create domestic legislation that treats IUU as a priority fishing crime. We need to look at utilizing port state measures. Port state measures, international legal instrument that can prevent ports from docking at various harbors or ports in South Africa and all the other countries in order that they can't offload their catch. We look at dramatically increasing the punishments in terms of that, and that's with prosecuting in terms of prevention of organized crime. And obviously significantly enhanced monitoring, surveillance, control, and enforcement efforts. And we need to stop corruption. I think there was a report by the Independent Security Studies, that some corruption within the department, unfortunately, where they were undercutting the price of abalone and selling it, so that offset the need to actually confiscate instead of preventing it completely. So there you can see an example that the undercut price of 18 Rand per kilo compared to what the market-related price at the time was 350 Rand per kilo. So that links to the bribery and corruption of officials within the department. What is involved? This map shows the seizures taking place with the green dots. You can see it's pretty much all over South Africa, mostly concentrated within the Western Cape area, a little bit in the Eastern Cape as well. We've actually found there's more movement from the Western Cape to the Eastern Cape now. Enforcement efforts have been improved in the Western Cape, so we're seeing a trend, currently a turf war in the Eastern Cape. And just to give you a story, it's quite interesting. Along the coastline here between Noordhoek and Cape Recife, the abalone ranching farm, we've obtained some footage of night vision where we have all the divers, the abalone divers at nighttime come in. And we have law enforcement, there's only a few law enforcement, and they come in and they target one specific group. Now, all these divers work for different syndicates. They only target one specific group. So what they do is they drop everything they run. Then the other poachers share their spoils with them. So you're looking at the organized nature that they are, yet we as law enforcement are not quite as organized as they are. They're prepared to let go of theirs and share it with the other ones. And like I said, they work for different syndicates. And as you can see, it goes up to Johannesburg or Tambo, where it goes to export it to via Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana. This shows the main smuggling routes. It's a report developed by Traffic, coming out of southern Africa and the SADC countries, all the way going to mainland China and to Hong Kong. As you can see, even Lesotho, Swaziland, Zimbabwe, which are landlocked countries. This begs the question, we have to look at different types of legislation. Now, there's a piece of legislation of the USA called the Lacey type provisions, where what we're saying is that when we have abalone, for example, exported from Lesotho and Swaziland, and we have mud crab from Botswana, it's not illegal in those particular countries. So possession of abalone in Zimbabwe is not illegal. Okay? So therefore they get away with it. If we can implement a Lacey type legislation within the SADC region, it will make it illegal for them to be in the possession of abalone in Zimbabwe because it's illegal in the country of origin, being South Africa. So we're trying to advocate for a Lacey type of provision through our SADC regional fisheries task team that we can implement through all the SADC regional countries, that we can help prevent that. And that's part of that collaboration. So it'll make it illegal in those landlocked countries as well. So that's why it's so important that we need collaboration within Africa, worldwide as well, but in particular in the SADC region that we're working in. Another example shows you that in this freezer, chest freezer, there was found abalone, and it was shipped to Johannesburg. It came back with a consignment full of illegal cigarettes. Again, that's the organized nature of the crime. That's just to indicate again the different elements of organized crime in terms of bribery, human trafficking, credit card fraud, human trafficking, etc. So at the moment, this is how it feels. Organized crime is the Great Dane, and law enforcement is the little dog. So we're up against it due to those stories I told you now, how the poachers actually share their spoils. So we find international systemic weaknesses. If you look at weak interagency and cross-border cooperation in South Africa, for example, in the Western Cape, we have so many law enforcement agencies focusing on the marine space. SAPS, fisheries, Cape Nature, sand parks, local municipalities, Cape Town, City of Cape Town marine units, they're all chasing numbers, but there's little collaboration. The left arm is not talking to the right arm. That's the purpose for Operation Pekisa as well. So in the regions, we find that there's a sense of awareness, but the processes are slow. We know corruption is rife. If you had to ban abalone completely, it would just criminalize communities and promote organized crime more. The SAPs have very office use, they can prosecute all the way to POCA, which is your prevention of organized crime. We look at a similar case now, a local case again with Julian Brown, who was originally sentenced to 20 odd years. He won on appeal in connection with the technicality of his search warrant. The DPCI, the Hawks, they are overburdened. The National Prosecuting Authority have inexperienced prosecutors linked to this. What we try and do is advocate with awareness workshop with prosecutors, with the judiciary, keeping in mind separation of powers, just to inform them the seriousness of these cases. And again, like I said, there's just too few POCA prosecutions. So some items we want to focus on is looking at draft new regulations on foreign vessels. We want to look at a new crime being failure to prevent corrupt activities. Something that's not on my slide is also sometimes law enforcement is too reactive. We need to be more proactive. We want to actually stop the abalone from coming out of the ocean. That's the first goal. Therefore, we look at things to commit conspiracy to commit a crime. If you come across someone with all diving kits and the tools to dive out abalone, maybe we can charge with a conspiracy to commit before they actually commit the crime. So those are some aspects. Lastly, I'm almost finished. Just some 3 cases that were quite interesting. We have a long liner under 2 flag states, 2 countries of origin, Taiwan and Seychelles. There was some footage in 2014 where 4 people were shot on board one of the vessels. And nothing's ever come from that. And that just shows you there must be a political will. So due to that lawless society within the high seas, nothing's actually come from it. There was no state. Taiwan and Seychelles didn't take ownership to investigate further. So that's still pending. Nothing's come from it. We have this case, a local case from South Africa, where 10 Indonesian vessels, well, we assume they're Indonesian because they are technically ghost ships. 2 of them were absconded and still at large. So we need to know what we're dealing with. And the last one, which is a bit of a success story, which comes out of Mauritius, which is a Sri Lankan vessel under the Sri Lanka flag state, where it's showing what cooperation can do with cross-referencing this ship to the vessels list with the regional management of the organization in Mauritius, identified that these ships were actually fishing illegal in Mauritian water, and they were Sri Lankan vessels. So if we do share information with collaboration, it can work. Last but not least, I know Professor van As normally talks about fisheries, not necessarily the sexy crime. We always talk about wildlife crime in terms of the rhino poaching and that. But you don't eat rhino and you don't eat elephant. We do eat the resources from the fish, from the sea. So the importance of, not to negate the importance of the wildlife crime, the importance of fisheries can't be understated. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I'm always so impressed with the multifaceted, multi-pronged approach that Fish Force takes to addressing this problem, and it really just puts them at the vanguard of all attempts really to try and address this very serious problem. Thank you. Right, I'd like to now, is that me? Okay, I would like to now just open up the floor to questions. Are the 2 online speakers still present? I don't see Professor Lombard. Okay. Right, so if anyone has any questions, if I can ask you please just to introduce yourself. Not a long bio, just your name, so the person knows who they're speaking to when they respond. If you can't remember the name of the speaker, you're welcome to refer to them as speaker 1, speaker 2, etc. All right, does anyone have any questions? Yes, thank you. I'll bring you the mic.
Okay, thanks.
Hi.
My name's Belinda. I've got lots of questions, but I want to start with Michael. It was a question that popped up and in discussion with others. Do you think that in our metro that banning night diving is something that would help with poaching, just banning anybody from diving at night? And is that something that would be enforced with a municipal bylaw, or is that just a silly idea that some people had?
Thanks for the question. It's a good question. I think if you ban it, it could be a deterrent. I don't think night diving, if you ban night diving, I don't think it will have a massive effect because the problem that we find in South Africa, we have such a long coastline and we don't have enough manpower to actually enforce that coastline. I know we've got Karabo here at the back from border management. We just don't have enough enforcement officers to actually enforce that. We have a lot of private security guards involved here with dark water ops that are involved along our specific coastline here by Cape Recife area, and they do a lot of good work, but just there isn't enough manpower. So it might be a deterrent, but I don't think it's a long-term fix. And yes, sorry, you can enforce with municipal bylaws.
Anyone else have any other questions? before I come back to Belinda, who said she had lots of questions. Anyone else? Lungisani?
Hi, my name is Lungisani. Yeah, very interesting. Actually, I also have lots of questions, but just maybe you know who's responsible for searching a vessel before it leaves the harbor, you know, to see if fishermen do not have guns or illegal equipment that they're not supposed to take to sea with them. Just curious, thanks.
Thanks for the question. Well, the DFFE, the Department of Fisheries, will be involved there. The fishery control officers have the right to search vessels, as well as the new Border Management Authority. They also have the authority, the Marine Unit, have the authority to board and inspect vessels. And just to check if those vessels have got the legal catch in terms of their fishing license, and if there's any, and what we're trying to do is actually train them to make sure that they're looking for anything other than that. You know, are there signs of forced labor, are there signs of maybe drugs or firearms, etc. So yes, the mandate would be with fisheries and BMA.
Any other questions? Yes.
So the whole searching thing, does it ever happen? I'm just curious because I've never seen anything like that. I have about 8 years working at the harbor, and everyone just goes in and out. Nobody checks anything. And sometimes, you know, even myself, I go in with my little cousin. Nobody asks me about this child. Because, I mean, it's very easy to, like, you know, you can just take whoever and they never come back. So who is doing it? Is it really happening? Like,
yeah, that's a good question. It does happen, but not enough. I think there's also the introduction of the Port State Measures Agreement, where we actually need to stop vessels from entering our ports if they don't have the required paperwork, etc. That's also the preventative versus reactive. But yes, it does happen, but unfortunately not enough. Karab, if I can put you on the spot, how many vessels do you guys inspect along PE port in the area? Do you know? Of late? Once. Yeah. Yeah.
Like he said, it doesn't happen often.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah.
Yes, we have a question from Denise.
Hi, thanks. This is sort of for Anthea and Michael, both. This morning we had a session on that involved female seaweed harvesters. And so there's also that sort of fisheries in that aspect. So it's traditional fishery, so to speak, but they've been disadvantaged in different ways. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your work, Anthea, and then yours, Michael, so like sometimes your good Samaritans interfere and take their seaweed harvest, which is difficult. But then in also legislation, they work for somebody. So they're independent contractors that generally get their permits via a central company. And there is a disenfranchisement in that the small-scale fisheries, whether it's finfish, mussel collecting, or seaweed collecting, somehow are not given those permits. It's given to the companies and then they subcontract. And so I'm just wondering your ideas on how to deal with that. So first, I guess, for Anthea and then for Michael.
Thanks for the question, Dr. Shea. I thought I'm off the hook, so to speak. Yeah, I think if government is serious with regards to recognizing customary fishing rights, customary fishers, in my understanding, is a communal activity. So the communities would get the right as a community, and if those ladies are part of a community that is attached specifically to catching that type of species or that type of marine resource, then that is the extent to which the legislation or the regulations can go. So at the end of the day, it again comes back to the point of recognizing that pre-existing right. So the starting point for government when they are sitting down and going to embark on the exercise of divvying out or issuing these rights is to start with your traditional fishing communities first and then go down the line? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Dr. Anthony, yeah, in terms of that. And it comes back to the government starting with the communities first in terms of the quotas and the total allowable catches, and that using that as a benchmark going forward here.
Thank you. I actually just have a question, one question for Prof. Mishi and then one for Dr. Hamukwaya. So I'll start with Prof. Mishi. I was just wondering, I'm listening to your presentation on, using, and I'm no economist, so I apologize if I butcher some of the terminology, but, almost the economic accounting principles, the formulas that you apply to reach those figures, and whether, recent attempts to try and value ecosystem services, and then more specifically attempts, to place some kind of value on ocean resources and ocean services through, things like the Ocean Accounts Framework. I was just wondering, is it the same kind of principles that are applied, or, is there a whole new economic sort of exercise? Will it differ depending on the kind of resource? I noticed that you focus sort of more on the recreational value. So I was just wondering if you could maybe provide some insight on that to those of us that know nothing about economics. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so the ocean accounting system is one thing that needs to be developed. Only very few countries have got a proper accounting system for the ocean, which would help now. If there's like any kind of investment, you would see how it filters to the rest of the other sectors within the economy. So that is needed and needed urgently. That I understand there have been some colleagues that were working on that. So I'm not very sure where it is at the moment, but that is something that is really needed and slightly different from what I was talking about here. Then when you look at that, yes, you can value any kind of product, good, service within the ocean system, and beyond that as well. So any item that is not tradable. So whether we are talking about the large marine species and what is the economic value of that, you can actually be able to put a value depending on how individuals are interacting or are trying to access or enjoy that particular product. So it can be applied in any of the products or services, including actually recreational services, the provisioning and general ecosystem benefits that are generated.
Thank you very much. Lungasani, I just have a question for Dr. Hamukwaya. Doctor, I was just wondering, I was looking at your presentation when you had some of your, some of the figures, looking back over the last few years, and I was just wondering if you had noticed if there have been any changes in the status of the, I know in particular you focus on the hake stocks, but whether there have been any impacts from sort of increased mining activities off, not just the west coast of South Africa, but also further up in Namibia. We know, well known for off-coast diamond mining. And is that sort of factored in when, these agreements are reached? For instance, if an agreement is entered into between Namibia and South Africa, is there any possibility of, would there need to be consultation with Namibia if the South African government decided to grant another 10, offshore mining licenses? I mean, would that not then impact on the viability of the stocks? I was just wondering if you had any comments on that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much on that. As far as I'm aware, the two countries are talking to each other. First, within the Benguela Current Convention, they have a number of working groups. Some are looking precisely on issues related to the impact of the ecosystems, oil and gas, or dealing with the environment and so on. So the only, I think, weaknesses at the moment is that decisions are not taken, binding decisions are not taken and enforced, working groups will discuss this, and then I think they more or less ended up there. So I think they still efforts need to be done to make the convention more effective in terms of how decisions are made, or how research is informing the decision makers and so on. I think there's still more that need to be done to ensure that the sharing of information is made more effective. But within the agreement that was signed in respect of certification, these issues need to be discussed, and I think they are discussed. Yeah, so that's what I could say. But I think the formal way, which will be more impactful, is when these are discussed in the commission or convention, and then binding decisions are taken for enforcement. So that's what I could say on this one, but I think this exchange of information that could impact on the environment, especially at working group levels.
Thank you very much. I know Lungasani, and then I think we can take, Dr. Shell had a question, and then, so you will be the last. All right.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Prof. Miche, I have a question. I hope my question is not too vague, but I'm just curious. Have you ever been involved in some work where you have to quantify those, the value of the economic benefits in a study and the value of the natural environment, where you have to look at the cost-benefit analysis and to say maybe there's a proposed coastal development around a sensitive conservation area, or maybe to say this project can happen, or maybe this project cannot happen because of the economic spin-off that might arise, or the damage that might arise pre and after the development. Thanks.
Yes, I've been involved in such, but in one instance, we were actually overruled by the environmental assessment part of the project. So it is very much possible, and I've been involved in one of large-scale projects where they wanted to say what are the costs and benefits for this particular development. Because yes, there could be employment that come during construction, there could be spin-offs from whatever the construction that has happened, but it can also damage the environment, a number of other things, including like tourism, just like the scenic would actually change. So there are a number of changes. So you quantify all those particular aspects. So it's very much possible. But one project that I'm mentioning has actually been overshadowed by the environmental aspect, even if the costs were there, because ours now, in terms of the species that were going to be lost, was actually understating that compared to the environment, the benefit of that to the environment. So there's need actually for working together between those that do environmental assessment and also the economic assessment, so that there is like a balance of the views there. Yeah.
I think there we go. I see that Professor Lombard's back into the chat, so I'll ask her a question. Mandy, in terms of balancing, your marine spatial planning and the MPAs, you did show the results that, it spreads out and it can help local communities. But how do we balance that the structuring of the MPAs and governing of them and still keep the access? So, sort of like Anthea's talk about customary fishing laws, how do we ensure that we still have that connectivity of communities, and how is that factored in, or is it still is it being factored in when you do your marine spatial planning?
Thanks, Denise. Yeah, are you hearing me? I'm just testing comms.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So that, of course, is the million-dollar question, and we could talk about that for hours. But what I like to do is I like to look at where there have been successes in achieving that and what characterizes those successes. And invariably, you will find that where you've really hit that sort of happy space where the communities are happy and the biodiversity is happy, it's where there's good governance. So where there's a very top-down approach to marine protected areas and management and design, you will always find a lot of unhappiness because there is usually a lack of consultation with adjacent and local communities, or with users, big commercial users that might not be adjacent but are using that area. So if you start with looking at the governance of an area, and you started looking at how the planning or the protection came about, you usually find that it's top down. You usually find that there's always going to be someone who's unhappy. I always think of a wedding. You can't invite everyone, so you've got to make some people happy, but you're going to make some people unhappy. And it's the same with MPA design and planning. You're never going to make everybody happy, but you generally make most people happy most of the time if you have very, very good stakeholder engagement from the very beginning, and you have good governance, because you can't have a decent stakeholder process if you've got broken governance. So that's sort of the one thing. And then the other thing is successes are generally being shown, especially for coastal MPAs, when they are locally managed. So in African contexts and in small island developing state contexts, you find that the locally marine managed areas show more success than do top-down approach types of marine protected areas. So, and also that happy medium is going to be very different if it's a pelagic or a high seas MPA. How many users have you got? How are you going to enforce it? How are you going to figure out your compliance? So I would almost say that every single case of a zonation in the ocean or an MPA design is going to be sort of case specific, but the general rules are always very good and thorough and early stakeholder engagement and very good governance. Be that, a national governance or a provincial or a local, you need good governance, and you need trust between the authority that's in charge of that planning and enforcing that planning and the people that are using that ocean area. And I think that's all I'll say on that, if that's okay.
Thank you, Prof. I believe we have one more question from the gentleman in the back.
Yes, thank you. The question, I think, is for Michael. Given the length of the coastline that we're exposed to, and obviously we're stretched in terms of law enforcement, have you guys looked into the role that can be played by the intelligence services, whether SSA or whether it's community-driven intelligence? Because I think that's something that we're definitely not looking into. And while you're answering that, we look in the Western Cape area where you were saying, obviously there's been a reduction in terms of this IW, but there is still a problem, especially in the West Coast area, Langaban to be specific. But what is the interesting point about Langaban is the fact that there is a Special Force Regi, which is your seaborne special force, which has highly capable intelligence operators. But why do we still see the rise of this illegal fishing in that particular area? I don't know if I'm making sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Karabo. Yeah, you make sense. To the first part of your question was, to get involvement of community because we have such a big, long coastline and minimal law enforcement is the involvement of honorary marine conservation officers, which started out in the Western Cape and the West Coast. We've had involvement with honorary marine conservation officers now in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal, so that's expanding. We've also looked at trying to investigate the use of military veterans. To appoint them as peace officers, so they can also support fishery control officers and law enforcement. So that will just increase numbers in terms of that aspect. That is work in progress. Working with the Department of Military Veterans is rather slow, but it's something we're looking into. Your second part of your question, yes, there's been movement from the Western Cape into the Eastern Cape, but you're right. Up the West Coast and Langebaan area is still quite a big hotspot. In terms of state security involvement, this is where we talk about with Operation Pakisa and the Marine and Ocean Crime Priority Committee. There's a lot of the time we're finding they're chasing numbers. There's not a lot of collaboration. The purpose of Pakisa was to hurry up. The word Pakisa means hurry up. And to get all the role players and Initiative 5 where we sit and have state security, sandparks, Cape Nature, you name it, all there to look at these type of investigations. But I think collaboration is key, and I think law enforcement still works very much in their own silos, and I think that's to me is the big factor why the West Coast is still a bit of a problem area.
Thank you, everybody. I think that concludes this afternoon's session. I would just like to extend our thanks to the speakers for your insightful and thought-provoking presentations, and sharing your experience and your research with us has, I think, opened us up to all kinds of questions, and hopefully we can engage at some point in the future. I'd also just like to thank all the audience members for your great questions and for giving us your time this afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.